Chapter 580. Without any hesitation, Lin Feng blurted out, "This subordinate hopes that my lord can bestow upon me a soul stone." This soul stone was not a soul stone. Within the currency of the Xingfen continent, there was a type of currency called soul stone. However, the soul stone that Lin Feng wanted was naturally not the currency of the Xingfen continent. Instead, it was the soul stone that came from the Thunder Mist Sea. After making this request, Lin Feng nervously looked at the Saint King. He had always been calm, but at this moment, he was extremely nervous. Soul stone. The Thunder Punishment Saint King frowned for a moment before relaxing. He looked at Lin Feng and helplessly shook his head. This king does not have a soul stone. As if sensing Lin Feng's disappointment, the Thunder Punishment Saint King explained, "This king can clearly tell you that soul stones do exist, but they are even rarer than 9th Revolution Saint artifacts. In the entire Suiyang realm, including the Saint Kings, there are probably not many people who possess a soul stone." How can that be? Lin Feng could not understand. Since soul stones did exist, how could a Saint King not be able to obtain a soul stone with his ability? He would rather believe that the Thunder Punishment Saint King was lying. There is no need to doubt this king's words. The Thunder Punishment Saint King slowly said, "Since you know about soul stones, you should also know where they are produced. Soul stones are produced in the depths of the Thunder Mist Sea, and in the depths of the Thunder Mist Sea, we Saint Kings are unable to enter." A trace of fear flashed through his eyes. It was so small that Lin Feng did not notice it. In short, you only need to know that even if someone possesses a soul stone, that person can only be an Earth Saint or even a Peak Prime. It is impossible for them to be a Saint King. The Thunder Punishment Saint King was already patient enough to explain so much to Lin Feng. However, he did not want to continue this topic. He looked at Lin Feng and said, "Change your request." A bitter smile appeared on Lin Feng's face. He did not expect that even the high and mighty Saint King did not have a soul stone. Now, it seemed like the Thunder Punishment Sage King had been just teasing him when he had passed the 3rd stage. At that time, he was not valued by the Saint King at all. Perhaps the Thunder Punishment Saint King was just making fun of him. Although Lin Feng was disappointed that he did not obtain a soul stone, he did not completely give up. After taking a deep breath, Lin Feng sincerely said, "This subordinate wishes to ask for your help to save a relative of mine." After a pause, he added, "It is this subordinate's contracted demonic beast." Contracted demonic beast? The Holy King glanced at Lin Feng in surprise. Very few people in the Suiyang realm would sign a contract with a demonic beast. "I didn't expect you to." "Yes, you came from another realm. You must have signed a contract with a demonic beast back then." Demonic beast. The demonic beasts of the realm Saint King of the realm were demonic beasts of Earth Saint. Demonic beasts that had reached the peak of the martial saint realm were able to speak the human language. Demonic beasts that had reached the Earth Saint realm were able to transform into humans. On the surface, they looked almost no different from humans, but their temperament still contained a trace of the demonic beast's ruthlessness and viciousness. A contract could be signed between a human and a demonic beast, but if the demonic beast took the form of a human, then the contract would be meaningless. This was because a contracted demonic beast that had taken the form of a human was no different from an ordinary servant. Furthermore, a demonic beast at the Earth Saint realm was already very powerful. Naturally, it would not be willing to be ordered around by a human. Therefore, it was very rare to see contracted demonic beasts in the Suiyang realm. Lin Feng and Nono were one of the rare exceptions. "Let me take a look first. I will know whether or not it can be saved after I take a look." The Thunder Punishment Saint King was not 100% confident. Since Lin Feng needed a soul stone to save his contracted demonic beast, it was obvious that the demonic beast's soul was severely damaged. It could not be healed by ordinary objects. Although he was a Saint King and was extremely powerful, He was not omnipotent. Lin Feng nodded. He carefully took out a small ice coffin from his sleeve. He held the small ice coffin in his palms and looked at the Thunder Punishment Saint King hopefully. My lord, please save Nono. Nono. The Thunder Punishment Saint King looked at the ice coffin. Nono is this little guy's name, right? While talking, he glanced at Lin Feng from the corner of his eyes and said, You guys signed an equal contract. As expected of a Saint King, he could see the contract between Lin Feng and Nono at a glance. Lin Feng wanted to say something, but the Thunder Punishment Saint King stopped him with a look. Don't speak. Let me take a closer look. The eyes of the huge energy face in the sky that covered most of the sky suddenly erupted with a bright light that was like a torch, as if it was going to stir up the world. Lin Feng bent down slightly and closed his mouth. He was nervous, and expectant. He waited silently. Suddenly, the huge face let out a soft sound of surprise. There was a hint of surprise in the sound. Lin Feng was puzzled, but he did not dare to disturb it. However, the expression of the huge human face that covered the sky became increasingly solemn. The eyebrows that were formed by energy also deeply furrowed towards the center of the eyebrows. After a long time, the Thunder Punishment Saint King slowly retracted his gaze and looked at Lin Feng again. He looked at Lin Feng deeply and did not speak for a long time. Lin Feng was very nervous. At the same time, he felt a little uncomfortable. He could not help but ask, My lord, what's wrong? This contracted demon beast of yours. The Thunder Punishment Saint King seemed to be considering his words. Its origin is not simple. He seemed to be doubting his own guess, but he had no reason to doubt it. Lin Feng knew nothing about this. He was more concerned about Nono's soul injury. My lord, can you save it? Lin Feng was a little anxious. I'm sorry. The Thunder Punishment Saint King was a little ashamed. He sighed and said, Although I want to save it, but its soul energy is almost exhausted. It only has a trace of its soul origin left. In this situation, I can't do anything. If there was a way, he would definitely make a move. Not to mention that Lin Feng was someone he valued very much and was the only general under his command. Just based on Nono's possible identity, he had no reason not to make a move. However, there was nothing he could do. In Nono's situation, other than the Soul Stone, no one else could do anything. The Thunder Punishment Saint King's words were like a sharp sword that stabbed into Lin Feng's heart. It was like the judgment of the death god. He was almost desperate. No, you must have a way. He shook his head vigorously. He even seemed a little crazy. He begged humbly and pitifully, You are the Supreme Saint King. If even you can't save it, who in the world can? My lord, you are the Supreme Saint King. You are the omnipotent Saint King. Your subordinate begs you, please save Nono, okay? I beg you, you have to save it. He was a little incoherent. His tone was extremely humble. He was even worse than the most humble servant. Looking at Lin Feng at this moment, the Thunder Punishment Saint King sighed in his heart. He had paid attention to Lin Feng for so long. He more or less understood this young man. He knew that Lin Feng had a very calm personality. He was never moved by the outside world. Whether it was ridicule, disdain, or praise from others, this young man was unmoved. Even when he passed the 9th, 13th, and 15th levels of the Sword God Palace and obtained endless glory, this young man was never excited. It was as if there was nothing in the world that could change his expression. However, such an extremely calm young man was so flustered, humble, desperate, and helpless at this moment, it was hard to imagine how much this contracted demonic beast meant to him. Lin Feng. The Thunder Punishment Saint King looked at Lin Feng with a complicated expression. His expression was solemn as he said, Although I am a Saint King, I am not omnipotent. You don't have to pin your hopes on me or any other Saint King, because no Saint King can save Nono. Although this fact was a little cruel, he had to say it. He had to break Lin Feng's fantasy, and let him see the reality clearly. The only thing in the world that can save it is the Soul Stone. If you really want to save it, you have to pull yourself together and go find the Soul Stone. However, even a Saint King did not have the Soul Stone. Could Lin Feng really get it? The chances were so slim that it was negligible. It was because he knew this that Lin Feng was so desperate and helpless. However, after being reminded by the thunder punishment Saint King, Lin Feng finally calmed down a little. Yes, there is still the Soul Stone that can save Nono. How can I give up like this? He comforted himself and slowly calmed down. Giving up halfway was definitely not Lin Feng's personality. Seeing that Lin Feng had calmed down, the thunder punishment Saint King could not help but look at him with admiration. You are indeed an epoch-making genius. Your mentality is not inferior to your talent at all. This was the type of genius that he admired the most. I don't need you to do anything for the next 10,000 years, or even 100,000 years. So, you can use this time to try and find the Soul Stone. The thunder punishment Saint King said slowly. After 100,000 years, if you still haven't found a Soul Stone, you will have to come back to see me and do some things for me. As long as you can do these things well, I don't mind announcing it to the world. I will pay a certain price and offer a bounty of Soul Stones. As for now, you are still too weak. You have not shown any signs of being a genius who passed the 15th stage. Even if I give you some tasks, you will not be able to complete them. Hearing this, Lin Feng was stunned. His expression became determined again. He nodded seriously. I will not let you down. The thunder punishment Saint King revealed a satisfied smile and did not hide his admiration. You are the best genius that I have ever seen. I have reason to believe that with your talent and temperament, you will become the protagonist of this era in the future. You flatter me. Lin Feng bowed slightly. I am preparing to head to the Thunder Fog Sea. If there is nothing else, I will take my leave. Now that he was sure that the Sword God's palace could not find a way to save Nono, there was no need for Lin Feng to stay there and continue to pass the stages. Even if he passed the 18th stage, he would not be able to save Nono. Why should he waste his energy and time? Unexpectedly, the thunder punishment Saint King smiled faintly and said, Don't be in a hurry to leave. Finding the Soul Stone is not something that can be done overnight. There is no need to rush. The thunder punishment Saint King stared at Lin Feng. I can see that you still have energy left. Why don't you continue to pass the stages? If you can pass the 18th stage. Although the thunder punishment Saint King did not believe that Lin Feng could pass the 18th stage, he still said it. Perhaps you will be pleasantly surprised because it will be of great help to you in finding the Soul Stone. After saying this, even he could not help but laugh. The 18th stage was a stage that only Saint Kings could pass. Could Lin Feng really pass it? Chapter 581. Regardless of whether Lin Feng could pass or not, the thunder punishment Saint King hoped that Lin Feng would try again. What if Lin Feng passed? Moreover, even if Lin Feng could not pass the 18th level, the thunder punishment Saint King could use this opportunity to see where Lin Feng's limit was. As the first and only general under his command, the thunder punishment Saint King did not know enough about Lin Feng. Therefore, he needed to know more about Lin Feng. At the very least, he needed to have a rough understanding of the limits of Lin Feng's talent. Of course, he did not lie to Lin Feng. If Lin Feng could pass the 18th level, it would indeed be a huge surprise. However, the probability of this happening was almost negligible. After all, the 18th level of the Sword God's Palace was a level that only Saint Kings could pass. Almost no one below the Saint King could pass it. Even the first generals under the Saint Kings were no exception. The thunder punishment Saint King did not have the slightest confidence that Lin Feng could pass the 18th level. Lin Feng hesitated for a moment. However, since the thunder punishment Saint King had already spoken, he could not refuse. He did not think too much about it. Since the Thunder Punishment Saint King had suggested that he continue, then he would continue. He also wanted to know if he could pass the 18th level. At the same time, he was also curious about the surprise that the Thunder Punishment Saint King mentioned. If even the Thunder Punishment Saint King said that it was a surprise, it was enough to show that the reward for passing the 18th level would not be bad. "I am very willing to continue," Lin Feng said tactfully. The Thunder Punishment Saint King was very satisfied with Lin Feng's answer. He smiled and said, "Before you continue, I will give you another thing. Take it as your reward for passing the 15th level and becoming my general." As he spoke, a token made of metal similar to dark iron flew down from the sky and finally stopped in front of Lin Feng. "This is my token. It is called the Thunder Punishment Token. With it, you can contact me through it. However, its greatest use is that it has the qualifications to mobilize a Thunder Punishment army of no more than 100,000 men under this king's command." The battle prowess of a saint ruler's army was obviously extremely terrifying. Even though Lin Feng could only mobilize 100,000 at most, every single one of them could fight against 100, 1,000, or even 10,000. They were basically no weaker than a peak organization. Only the three ancient organizations could firmly suppress them. This was the first Thunder Punishment token given by the Thunder Punishment Saint King, and it held great significance. From the side of this matter, it once again reflected the importance that the Thunder Punishment Saint King attached to Lin Feng. One had to know that the Thunder Punishment Sage King had many powerful cultivators under his command, and there were countless geniuses. However, Lin Feng was the first person in a billion years to be given a Thunder Punishment token. Of course, when the Thunder Punishment Saint King gave him the Thunder Punishment token, he also reminded him, "The significance of the Thunder Punishment token is extraordinary. If it is not necessary, I hope that you will not use it easily. As for how to use it, you only need to infuse your mental strength into it, and you will know. I will not explain it further." Lin Feng's expression was solemn and serious. He took a deep breath and said respectfully, "Thank you, my lord." To Lin Feng, the Thunder Punishment token was both an honor and a responsibility. "Go on, continue to break through the levels. I will wait for your good news." The Thunder Punishment Saint King smiled faintly. The huge face made of energy that covered the sky slowly dissipated after he said those words. The Saint King's will that filled every corner of the isolated city also quietly disappeared without a trace. The deathly silent city and the lonely figure set off each other, making the scene even more desolate. In the next moment, without any warning, Lin Feng's figure disappeared from the isolated city. When he reappeared, he was already outside the palace of the 16th level. He was still at the side of the building that looked like a long winding dragon. From the entrance of the building, a figure slowly walked toward the palace. Lin Feng silently stepped into the palace of the 16th level. His persistent and resolute face seemed to be saying, "The real miracle has just begun from this moment." What Lin Feng did not know was that the outside world had gone crazy because of him when he had just broken through the 15th level. Many ancient factions in the entire Suiyang realm had gone crazy because of this extremely shocking news. To be exact, the Blood Peak continent, the Raymond continent, the Mulan continent, and the Suiyang continent in the center of the Suiyang realm were in an uproar. Perhaps ordinary people did not understand these things, but the many ancient powers could not sit still and do nothing. Ling Haotian's stunning performance had already shocked many people. It had even attracted the three ancient factions to send people to try to rope him in. The conditions that the three ancient factions offered were also better than the previous one. This proved their desire for Ling Haotian, their desire for such a genius. "Quick, activate the ultra-long-distance teleportation array immediately. We have to rush to the Sword God's palace before anyone else at all costs." This person will become the #1 genius in the history of the Sui-Yang realm. Having him is equivalent to having a limitless future. No faction can resist such a genius. Satisfy all his requests. Even if he asks you to die, you must die in front of him immediately. His importance is greater than anything else. Even if I have to give up the position of sect master or sect master, I am willing to do so. We can give up on Ling Haotian, but we can never give up on Lin Feng, because with the gap between us and the three ancient factions, even with Ling Haotian, it will be difficult for us to catch up to them. However, Lin Feng is different. A genius who has broken through the 15th level of the Sword God's Palace has the ability to lead any faction to the same height as the three ancient factions, or even surpass them. The eyes of all the faction leaders were red. Their eyes were filled with fanaticism as if they had seen a peerless treasure. If Ling Haotian had only caused a sensation and caused the various continents to shake, then Lin Feng had caused everyone to go crazy. The impact caused by the two was not on the same level at all. The three ancient factions attached great importance to Ling Haotian's appearance, which even alarmed their pavilion master, house master, and heaven master. However, the appearance of Lin Feng made the three existences who stood at the top of the pyramid in the Sui-Yang realm shudder with fear. Without any hesitation, they put down all the matters in their hands and hurriedly led a group of people to the Sword God's Palace at the fastest speed to show their sincerity. Such a genius was absolutely qualified to be on an equal footing with them. Although the latter had yet to display the ability that matched his talent, the fact that he had passed the 15th level of the Sword God's Palace was enough. On this day, the long-distance teleportation formations in the Bloodridge continent, Lameng continent, Mulan continent, and Sui-Yang continent went into overdrive. On this day, countless super-experts, leaders of various ancient and emerging factions, as long as they were ranked, set off for the same place. On this day, a torrent of people formed in the Sui-Yang realm, and the torrent rushed to the same place. At the same time, in the several teleportation passages in the Bloodridge continent, Du Yu of the Elixir Pavilion and Wei Fu of the Overturning Formation Sky led their respective teams back to their stations. Their mission was basically over. Whether they succeeded or failed, they had to return to their stations. However, not long after they stepped into the teleportation formation, they received an ultra-long distance message. This kind of ultra-long distance message could not be transmitted with a voice-transmitting jade slip. These were the voice-transmitting stones that the three ancient factions had stored for many years. Unlike the voice-transmitting jade slip, the voice-transmitting stone could transmit messages with a wider range and faster speed. However, the number of voice-transmitting stones was extremely small. Even the three ancient factions did not have many of them. It could be said that every piece of voice-transmitting stone was an extremely precious treasure. Unless there was an extremely important matter, the three ancient factions would never use the voice-transmitting stone so easily because the voice-transmitting stone could only be used once. Even the branch they set up in the Bloodridge continent only had a few voice-transmitting stones. Therefore, even if there was an important matter, they would usually use a voice-transmitting jade slip to transmit the message over and over again. It was like running a relay until the message finally reached the ears of the target. Ling Haotian's appearance had already cost them 4 voice-transmitting stones, 1 transmission and 1 reception, and it was a two-way transmission. Therefore, they had wasted 4 voice-transmitting stones at once. Now, both the Elixir Pavilion and the Overturning Formation Sky only had 6 voice-transmitting stones left in their branches on the Bloodridge continent. Du Yu and Wei Fu originally thought that the remaining 6 voice-transmitting stones would be enough to support them for a long time. They might not even need to use them for 100 million years. Who knew, not long after, the voice-transmitting stone received another voice-transmitting stone. With a cracking sound, the voice-transmitting stone shattered and a voice came from the shattered voice-transmitting stone. Before they could hear the content of the voice-transmitting stone, another one of the remaining 5 voice-transmitting stones shattered. They were almost stunned. However, this was not the end. After the second voice-transmitting stone shattered, the third voice-transmitting stone followed in the footsteps of the first and second voice-transmitting stones in just 3 breaths' time. The remaining 3 voice-transmitting stones shattered one after another in just a few breaths' time. No one had ever encountered such a situation. Even the 3 ancient powers had never encountered such a situation, no matter how great the crisis or difficulty they faced. What kind of important matter was it that the headquarters had to waste 6 voice-transmitting stones just to send a message? They even thought that the Elixir Pavilion and the overturning formation sky were facing a disaster. Soon, they heard the content of the voice-transmitting stones. The content of the voice-transmitting stones was almost exactly the same. There was only one meaning, which was to order them to return to the Sword God's palace immediately. They had to return to the Sword God's palace as soon as possible and at all costs to win over a genius named Lin Feng, a super genius who had shocked the world. As for the rest, the voice-transmitting stone did not say anything because the voice from the voice-transmitting stone was too anxious, and too excited to speak clearly. Even though they were hundreds of millions of miles away, separated by endless mountains and oceans, they could clearly feel the anxiety and excitement. Lin Feng? Who is that? Wei Fu was at a loss. He had some impression of this name, but he could not remember it at the moment. Even Du Yu, who had always been calm and wise, was confused by the headquarters' crazy actions at this moment. Lin Feng, the genius who was suppressed by Ling Haotian. Chapter 582. Although they were both commanders of the 3 ancient influences branches on the Bloodridge continent, Wei Fu had relied on his background to get to this position. On the other hand, Du Yu had relied on his own ability to get to this position step by step. Their strength was almost the same, but there was a huge gap between their backgrounds and abilities. In terms of background, Du Yu was not qualified to compete with Wei Fu, but in terms of ability, Wei Fu was far from Du Yu's match. Wei Fu could not remember Lin Feng's existence, but Du Yu immediately thought of Lin Feng. However, it was precisely because he thought of Lin Feng that he felt even more puzzled and confused about the headquarters' crazy actions. He was not familiar with Lin Feng, but when he first came to the Sword God Palace, he had a general understanding of him. Ling Haotian's rise was stimulated by this person. Otherwise, Ling Haotian would probably continue to keep a low profile and hide. It could be said that Lin Feng's excellent performance had indirectly led to Ling Haotian's stunning rise. Therefore, Lin Feng was a meritorious person, but also a pitiful person. He made Ling Haotian's name known all over the world, but he was overshadowed by Ling Haotian. When he was in the Sword God Palace, Du Yu had noticed that although Lin Feng was a genius, compared to Ling Haotian's amazing performance, Lin Feng was much more mediocre. The weight of a genius seemed to have been reduced because of this. Therefore, Lin Feng was a tragedy. An extremely excellent genius, even an epic-making genius, had encountered an even more excellent and incredible genius. He had been absolutely suppressed from beginning to end, which made him a pitiful and tragic figure. However, the reality was like this. Whether it was cruel or tragic, one had to learn to accept it. Du Yu also felt a little pity for Lin Feng, but that was all. In this world of survival of the fittest, no one would pity the losers. Only the winners could enjoy endless glory. As for Lin Feng, he wasn't a loser. It was just that he had lost in the formless battle against Ling Haotian. Therefore, no one would remember him. Even if someone remembered him, no one would pay attention to him. This was the information that Du Yu had learned. It was also the only impression that Lin Feng had left on Du Yu. Although Lin Feng is also very good, and can even be called an epoch-making genius, but, do you frown? The Elixir Pavilion only needs one Lin Feng, and that's enough. Lin Feng's existence can't bring us more help. He couldn't understand the orders from headquarters, much less approve of their decision. 6 sound transmission stones were destroyed in a row. Could it be that Lin Feng is even more important than Ling Haotian in the eyes of headquarters? One must know that even when the headquarters issued the order to rope in Ling Haotian, they were far from being this crazy and excited. It was hard to imagine what kind of charm Lin Feng had to force the Alchemy Pavilion to go so crazy. After taking a deep breath, Du couldn't help but shake his head. Forget it. Since the headquarters has issued such an order, then hold on. Du's eyes suddenly widened. He recalled the voice that had come from the voice transmission stone. It was a relatively unfamiliar voice. Although it was excited and anxious, it still couldn't conceal the supreme majesty that it contained. Although Du felt that this voice was rather unfamiliar, he had a faint impression of it in his mind. Gradually, a figure appeared in his mind. It was a majestic man with a gold-threaded demonic crown. The man's majesty was unparalleled. He was high and mighty, looking down on all living things. A raise of his eyebrows could make countless people tremble in fear. A smile could melt the ice and snow in winter. A word from him could dominate the situation of the world. Du had only seen him once, but the man's image was deeply engraved in his heart. No, although the voice is very similar, it shouldn't be him. Du couldn't believe his bold guess. He's one of the 3 great kings. He's the strongest person below the Saint Ruler. Even the 2 in the weapon refining pavilion and the overturning formation sky are slightly inferior. How could he be involved in this kind of thing? Moreover, with his identity and status, how could he be so anxious and excited? In Du's impression, that existence was high and mighty. Nothing in the world could affect him. This was completely different from the voice he had heard from the voice-transmitting stone just now. Although there were many similarities between the 2, Du firmly denied this guess. He didn't believe it, and he didn't dare to believe it. Although many thoughts flashed through his mind, only a few breaths of time had passed. Du, who had come to his senses, immediately gave a serious order to the team. Quick, get ready. We'll return to the Sword God's palace immediately. No matter who had transmitted the message, it couldn't change the fact that the headquarters were determined to get Lin Feng, a genius. This determination could be felt from the transmission just now. As the commander of the Bloodridge Continent branch, Du had to perfectly carry out the orders from the headquarters. Since the headquarters were so anxious, Du naturally couldn't wait calmly. If the mission failed because of him, he couldn't bear the consequences. Therefore, no matter how many doubts he had to immediately carry out the orders from the headquarters. In another transmission channel, Wei Fu's performance was even worse than Du's. This was because the transmission he had received was much more serious than Du's. It even threatened his position. The main content of the message was also to win over Lin Feng at all costs. However, there was an additional sentence at the end. The meaning of this sentence was that if Wei Fu's delay led to the failure of the mission, he would be expelled from the family, which was the family of Great Elder Fu Zhentian, the Wei family. If he was expelled from his family and lost the protection of the Wei family, who knew how many enemies Wei Fu had offended over the years would take revenge on him. Therefore, Wei Fu's decision was self-evident. Compared to Du's calm response, Wei Fu was more at a loss, as well as anxious and terrified. Without any hesitation, he turned around and shouted at everyone, "Return, return immediately." He clenched his fists impatiently, like an angry lion. No one dared to look at him, because his eyes had already turned red. "Quick, increase your speed to the fastest for this daddy. If you're late for even a breath, this daddy will kill all of you." Everyone kept quiet out of fear. However, Wei Fu's method was quite effective. Everyone moved quickly and increased the speed of shuttling through the transmission channel. Although the transmission channel would automatically send them to their destination, if they took the initiative to consume their origin energy, they could still achieve a good speed-up effect. However, this was a transmission channel after all. It was a one-way transmission. If they wanted to return to the Sword God's palace, they must first be transmitted to the exit of the transmission channel. No one could change this, not even the high and mighty Saint Kings. This was because this was the rule of heaven and earth. Saint Kings could control the rule, but they could not change the rule, let alone the rule of heaven and earth. Flying Dragon City. This was a city with a large population and was also an extremely prosperous city. Merchants, rangers, adventurers, and so on from all over the Bloodridge continent made this city even livelier. At the same time, Flying Dragon City was also a transmission hub. It was an extremely important transmission hub because many transmission routes had to go through Flying Dragon City's transmission channel. At this time, there were many people lining up beside Flying Dragon City's transmission channel. These people were either powerful, talented, or had a powerful background because ordinary people were not qualified to use the transmission channel. A group of city guards stood guard beside the transmission channel, maintaining the order of the transmission channel. Not long after, the transmission channel suddenly flashed with light and a group of people appeared in the transmission channel. Such a large group of people was very rare because there were very few people who were qualified to use the transmission channel. It could be said that such a large group of people was hard to come by in 100 years. Many people cast their gazes over and saw a group of men wearing uniform armor. Those who were experienced and knowledgeable immediately recognized the group of people before them. They could not help but exclaim, "It's the Lords of Overturn Formation Sky! Overturn Formation Sky!" Just these 3 words were enough to intimidate the crowd. The group immediately opened up a wide channel respectfully. They lowered their heads and did not dare to look too much, in case they angered the other party and got into trouble that they could not afford to offend. However, just as they took a step forward, they suddenly stopped and looked at each other in dismay at the transmission channel. "Quick, teleport back. Immediately!" Following an impatient and panicked coarse voice, a group of Overturn Formation Sky's people immediately turned around and rushed into the transmission channel as soon as they were teleported out. Of course, it was the reverse direction of the transmission channel. Their movements were very fast, but their formation was very messy and even seemed to be panicking. They did not look like an elite army at all, but more like a group of stray dogs or defeated deserters. It was as if there was a powerful enemy chasing after them from behind. The transmission channel flashed with light again and the group of people's figures had completely disappeared. Everyone stared at the transmission channel blankly. Countless question marks popped up in their minds. What was going on? If it were not for the uniform armor and the unique symbol that could not be imitated, they would even think that they were looking at a low-quality, motley army. At the same time, in another city, Derby City, a similar situation happened here. However, this group's performance was slightly better than Overturn Formation Sky's people. However, it was undeniable that both groups left a deep impression on people. However, the matter was far from over. Not long after, noises came from outside the teleportation array. Many people waiting to use the teleportation array turned their heads and saw the city lord, who was usually incomparably dignified, carefully accompanying several middle-aged men with cold faces. He walked over with a respectful smile, and his humble posture was clearly visible. Without any explanation, the city lord arranged for the middle-aged men to cut the line and use the transmission channel. An expert of Earth Stage 5, who had just walked to the front of the transmission channel, was forcefully pulled back by the city lord. He then smiled apologetically and said, "Sirs, please. The expert of Earth Stage 5 wanted to express his dissatisfaction, but the city lord glanced at him and said in a deep voice, "These 3 sirs are the envoys of the 12 paradises. If you want to compete with them, go ahead." When that person heard this, he immediately trembled. The half of his foot that had taken a step forward also trembled, and then he quietly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The 12 paradises were the forces of the Bloodridge continent. Although they were not as ancient as Overturn Formation Sky, Elixir Pavilion, and Weapon Refining Pavilion, the 12 paradises were still very influential on the Bloodridge continent. Ordinary people did not dare to offend them. After the city lord left, the people beside the transmission channel continued to line up. But soon the city lord came again. He still accompanied a group of people in an extremely humble manner. He also cut the line to use the transmission channel. It seemed that the 12 paradises was just the beginning. Following that, more and more representatives of the major forces came. The city lord also accompanied them back and forth many times. It was rare to see any of these big shots on a normal day. But at this moment they all came like a swarm of bees. This made everyone so shocked that their eyes almost popped out. Because of these people cutting the line, the people who had been waiting in line for a long time could not use the transmission channel. However, they did not dare to express their dissatisfaction with these people because they could not afford to offend any of them. Moreover, they were already dumbfounded by the shocking scene in front of them. How could they be in the mood to express their dissatisfaction? This was the first time that most of the people present had seen such a situation in their lives. After an unknown period of time, a young man finally plucked up the courage to ask the city lord, "City lord, why today?" The city lord waved his hand and interrupted him. "I know what you want to ask." The city lord said slowly, "There is no harm in telling you. Actually, these big shots are all going to the same place, the Sword God's Palace." He turned his head and looked in the direction of the Sword God's Palace. An unprecedented super genius was born there. His name is Lin Feng. Chapter 583. The City Lord was an expert at the 6th level of the Earth Realm, and he was only one step away from the perfection Earth Saint Realm. However, in the eyes of many great figures, the 6th level of the Earth Realm wasn't worth mentioning, even if he was at the 6th level of the Earth Realm. Although the 6th level of the Earth Realm and the 7th level of the Earth Realm were only separated by a thin line, they were 2 completely different levels. In fact, everyone knew that although the Sui-Yang realm divided the strength into 10 levels of the Earth Realm, the realms before the 7th level of the Earth Realm were considered one level, and after the 7th level of the Earth Realm was another level. The 7th level of the Earth Realm was a watershed. Only those who had stepped into the 7th level of the Earth Realm could be considered a true expert in the Sui-Yang realm. No matter where they went, they would have a certain right to speak. Even if the strength of these great figures was only slightly higher than the City Lord, this slight difference was like a natural chasm that separated the identities of the two. Therefore, the City Lord didn't dare to be careless. He personally accompanied every expert at the 7th level of the Earth Realm all the way to the teleportation formation. However, he understood that the place he was looking at, even those high and mighty perfection Earth Saint Realm experts didn't have the right to speak. He deeply understood what it meant to pass the 15th level of the Sword God's Palace. Before this, who has heard of the name Lin Feng? The City Lord's eyes were filled with a trace of reverence and envy. But from today onwards, this name will spread throughout the world, and his story will be talked about enthusiastically. He himself will become the most sought-after figure of this era. Ordinary geniuses would not be taken too seriously by a slightly larger force. This was because the people of these forces had lived for too long and had seen too many geniuses. However, the number of geniuses that could truly grow up was extremely small. Geniuses didn't represent experts, They only had the potential to become expert. Only those who truly had the strength could completely move them. What they needed wasn't potential, but strength. However, if a genius's talent reached an extremely monstrous level or even reached a height that they could only look up to, they couldn't not take it seriously. After sending off batch after batch of people, the city lord sneered in his heart. With that person's talent, how can people like you rope him in? No matter what you do, it's destined to be a waste of effort. Ordinary forces absolutely couldn't keep such a genius. Even those ancient forces with rich resources didn't have much confidence in roping such a genius in, let alone these local tyrants. The crowd in the queue was deeply shocked and speechless for a long time. So many high and mighty big shots, all for the sake of one person? One had to know that any one of these people was a well-known figure who could easily decide their life and death. The envoys of the 12 grotto heavens, the protectors of the Emerald Cloud sect, the sect master of the Golden Coil school. Each of these people was stronger than the last, each of them had a higher status than the last, and each of them had a greater influence than the last. Even the weakest among them was a powerful perfect circle expert. However, they were all rushing towards the same goal for the same person. For a moment, they were incomparably curious and deeply envious of the genius that the city lord had mentioned. But no matter what, they all remembered this name. Lin Feng, a name that was not difficult to remember. Besides Flying Dragon City, there were also Derby City, Lurong City, Auspicious City, and many other cities around the Sword God's palace. The teleportation formations in these cities didn't stop for a moment, and they were operating at practically the fastest speed in history. Wave after wave of people were ceaselessly converging towards the Sword God's palace through these teleportation formations. Not all cities were as prosperous as Flying Dragon City, and not every city was a teleportation hub. Some cities were very remote and backward, some cities were lacking in resources, and some cities were weak. Thus, the teleportation formations in these cities rarely operated because no one needed to use the teleportation formations at all. These city lords originally thought that this situation would continue forever, and perhaps it wouldn't change in the slightest when they perished or left their positions. However, no one had expected that the unexpected would come so suddenly and violently. Without any warning, those great figures that were usually difficult to meet had actually come to look for them one by one, and they wanted to borrow the teleportation formations in the cities. Thus, these teleportation formations that had been abandoned for a long time and were on the verge of rusting started to operate at the highest speed in history, and they even entered a state of overload. They ceaselessly sent group after group of people to the Sword God's palace or a teleportation point that was even closer to the Sword God's palace. The arrival of group after group of experts caused these city lords to be flustered and covered in sweat. It was all because they couldn't afford to offend a single one of these people. If they didn't serve these great figures well, then only the heavens knew if they would annihilate them at the slightest disagreement. After all, they were only tiny city lords. Perhaps in the eyes of most residents of the Suiyang realm, they were supreme great figures that controlled a city, possessed numerous city guards under their command, and controlled the life and death of the residents of the city. However, only they knew that they were nothing before these great figures, and perhaps their status was merely slightly higher than an ant. Even if these great figures really slapped them to death, the sects that stood behind them would probably not dare to seek justice with them. Some were well informed and knew the whole story of the incident, whereas some were completely unaware. However, all of them were aware that a world-shaking incident had definitely occurred in the Sword God's palace. The Northeast Territory had never been so bustling. The countless teleportation formations in the Northeast Territory were operating at an unprecedented speed. Practically all the top experts and powers on Bloodridge continent were converging incessantly towards the Northeast Territory, and their final objective was the Sword God's palace that resided in the Northeast Territory. Even if there were still some people who hadn't arrived, their gazes had converged onto the Northeast Territory without exception. It had become the center of attention on Bloodridge Continent, and it had become the center of the Sui-Yang realm. All of this was because of a single person, a young man that was still unknown just a day ago. Outside the manor of the Sword God's palace, unknowingly, the experts who had left long ago had returned to this place. In addition, there were many people who hadn't been there before. This time, there was a sea of people outside the manor. As far as the eye could see, the mountains and plains were filled with people, and the densely packed black dots were dazzling to the eyes. At this moment, the manor had long been surrounded by a dense crowd. This mighty scene was several times more serious than the situation caused by Ling Haotian. However, this was only the beginning because there was still a steady stream of people outside the manor. Even the mountain opposite the manor, which was the mountain where immortal Hu Yang had once cultivated in seclusion, had been occupied by a dense crowd. The ground was filled with people, and some even flew into the sky. It was fine if there were only one or two people, but when there were so many people, it was like a swarm of locusts that covered the sky. It was even more terrifying than the battlefield of the Battle of Longevity. As far as the eye could see, from the ground to the sky, as far as the eye could see, there was a dense crowd of people. Just a glance was enough to create a suffocating pressure on anyone, and no one dared to speak. If these were just ordinary people, it would be fine. However, the problem was that there were many experts of Earth Stage 5 and Earth Stage 6 in the crowd. Among them, Earth Stage 7 in the Great Circle of the Earth Stage 7 could be seen everywhere. They were inconspicuous in the crowd, and Earth Stage 8 in the Great Circle of the Earth Stage 8 were not too rare. If one were to calculate, everyone would be shocked by this huge number. They might even wonder, how did our Blood Peak continent have so many experts? Because the number of Earth Stage 8 in the crowd had already exceeded the number of Earth Stage 8 in the Blood Peak continent that people knew. Without a doubt, those old monsters who had been cultivating in seclusion had also come out of seclusion. Otherwise, the number of Earth Stage 8 in the Great Circle of the Earth Stage 8 would definitely not reach such a shocking number. Moreover, these old monsters' faces were unfamiliar. They definitely did not belong to the ranks of the Earth Stage 8 that people knew. Holding his breath and looking around, Yao Yang took a deep breath and said in an excited and dignified tone, "This is a real grand event." Compared to the scene at this moment, the commotion caused by Ling Haotian was not even worth mentioning. Zhuo Qingyue and Ren Songtian did not speak because they were already stunned by the scene in front of them. They never knew that there were so many experts hidden on the Bloodridge continent. Just the number of Earth Stage 8 experts present had already exceeded the number of Earth Stage 8 experts on the Bloodridge continent in their memory by more than double. This number had even surpassed the Mulan continent and the Raymond continent, and was second only to the Sui-Yang continent in the center of the Sui-Yang realm. However, this was not the end because they knew that as time passed, there would be more Earth Stage 8 in the Blood Peak continent arriving. They could not understand. Wasn't the Blood Peak continent the weakest of the 4 continents? When did the Blood Peak continent's overall strength become so tyrannical? Among the Earth Stage 8 in the crowd, they even felt that there were a few auras that were not inferior to Soldier Emperor Duyu Wei Fu, Jingzhu, Emperor Mang, and Wu Ju, who were half a step to Earth Stage 9. Did this mean that among the Earth Stage 8 in the crowd, there was an expert whose strength was not inferior to Soldier Emperor and the others? Yao Yang and the others were not the only ones who were stunned. Hu Yang Jinren and Soldier Emperor, who had already expected this, were also stunned by the huge movement in front of them. Jingzhu Wei Fu, Duyu, Emperor Mang, and Wu Ju also looked extremely dignified. Duyu and Wei Fu's faces were extremely ugly. They clearly felt that the auras were not inferior to theirs, and there was even an aura that was faintly superior to theirs, which was enough to pose a great threat to them. They gasped and were deeply shocked. Lin Feng had actually caused so many super old monsters to appear. The situation at the scene was faintly out of the control of Jing Zhu and the others. They even had a premonition that the situation in the Sword God's palace would be completely out of control soon. This premonition was extremely strong. Chapter 584. Even though the manor was packed with people, the scene was strangely quiet. Aside from a few people, the majority of the crowd had their gazes focused on the transparent virtual interface. It was extremely terrifying to gather the gazes of millions of experts. Even a half-step ninth stage expert would feel an immense pressure, even to the extent of being alarmed. Huang Wenbing, Jing Ting, Shen Tong, and the others also realized that things seemed to be serious. Although they did not know exactly how many people had come, or how many perfection sovereigns there were among them, just this shocking number was enough to deeply shock them. After all, compared to those perfection sovereigns who were used to grand occasions, they were still too inexperienced. Even though Shen Tong and the others had high statuses and were known as the 10 great geniuses of the continent, they were still too inexperienced and were far from being able to remain calm in front of such a grand occasion. Furthermore, even those old monsters were shocked to the point of being dumbstruck. It was understandable that Shen Tong and the others might not be able to perform well. Sister-in-law, boss, seems to have gone too far this time, Huang Wenbing said, stumbling. A trace of worry flashed in Jing Ting's eyes. I hope there won't be any accidents. Compared to the surprise, expectation, and envy of Shen Tong, Dong Zhuo, and Wen Biqiong, Huang Wenbing and Jing Ting had more considerations and their hearts were rather heavy. Dong Zhuo comforted them optimistically. Miss Jing, Brother Huang, you don't have to worry. Although these people are all here for Brother Lin, they're here to rope Brother Lin in. They definitely won't harm Brother Lin. Moreover, even if someone wants to harm Brother Lin, so many experts here won't allow it. Yes, Sister Jing Ting, Master Lin is an unprecedented genius on the Bloodridge continent. He will have a profound influence on the future of the Bloodridge continent. No one will harm him, and no one will dare to harm him. Wen Biqiong held Jing Ting's hand and comforted her in a low voice. No matter how the people outside were feeling, Lin Feng didn't stop breaking through the levels in the Sword God Palace. Lin Feng's consciousness had been deducing for a long time in Space No. 1. It had been so long that he couldn't remember the exact time. However, his efforts had paid off. He had calculated the answer to the 16th level. Although he had spent an extremely long time, far exceeding the requirements of the question, he had finally obtained the answer. Didn't he? Lin Feng felt a sense of accomplishment. There are still 2 more stages. I wonder if I can pass them with my own efforts. This was the 16th level, and the answer to the question was solved by himself. Number 1 didn't participate in the process at all. Number 1's only role was to speed up the passage of time in Number 1 realm, that was all. Not only the 16th stage, but all the stages from the 4th stage onwards were all answers that Lin Feng had obtained through his own efforts. In the first 3 levels, he did not have much confidence in himself. In addition, he was too impatient, so he borrowed the power of Space One, or perhaps he already had the answer in his mind. However, from the 3rd level onwards, he calmed down and was no longer impatient. He found that the questions in the Sword God's palace were not as difficult as he had imagined, and Space One had a time acceleration effect. Why couldn't he give it a try and pass the level with his own efforts? Fortunately, he did it. This made him even more confident. Thus, from the 4th round onwards, he no longer relied on Number 1. Every question was answered through his own efforts. Maybe I'm not as good as Ling Haotian, but in some aspects, I have an advantage that he doesn't have. Lin Feng became more and more confident. That is time. I have almost endless time to deduce. I don't believe that I can't find the answer. He neglected a problem. He was only at the limit of the Supreme Master. In terms of spiritual power and other aspects, he was at the bottom of the Sui-Yang realm, so he couldn't be compared with others according to normal logic. However, he neglected the unequal conditions in this aspect, so he lacked confidence. At least in solving the questions in the Sword God's palace, he didn't have much confidence. However, with the experience of success, this confidence slowly recovered and became more prominent. In the past, he admired Ling Haotian and admitted that he was inferior to him. But now, he was confident that he could compete with Ling Haotian. Of course, having confidence was one thing, but having interest was another. He was confident but not interested, because there was only one task for him now, and that was to do everything possible to awaken Nono. Challenging the Sword God's palace was only the Holy King's suggestion and a test of his own ability. After exhaling, Lin Feng opened his eyes. His pitch-black eyes were calm. His spiritual power came out of his body and entered the answer into the pitch-black stone tablet. Soon, the stone tablet reacted. A bright light bloomed. This light was different from before. It was actually colorful. The hazy, colorful light filled the entire palace, as if it was witnessing the birth of a miracle. The light was like a colorful crystal, so beautiful that it was dreamy and illusory. The empty pitch-black stone tablet slowly changed. At the center of the top of the pitch-black stone tablet, a brand new name slowly appeared. This was also the first time someone left a name on the pitch-black stone tablet in the palace of the 16th level. This name was Lin Feng, and it was also the only name left on the black stone tablet. It was lying alone at the center of the top of the black stone tablet, and the colorful light was faintly discernible, intoxicating those who saw it. Whoosh! Lin Feng's figure suddenly disappeared. He went to the palace of the 17th level. In the outside world, in the silent manner, as the transparent virtual interface changed, it finally caused deafening exclamations, uproars, and cheers. Amidst the exclamations, uproars, and cheers, even the thick and solid ground couldn't help but tremble slightly. There were a total of 18 levels in the Sword God's palace. Before today, the most outstanding genius in the past 10 billion years had stopped at the 10th level. Its difficulty had shattered the confidence of countless geniuses and made countless experts despair. It was like a natural moat in front of everyone, preventing anyone from taking a step forward. And this obstruction had stopped them for 10 billion years. 10 billion years, how long was that? It had buried generation after generation of experts. How many overlords that commanded the wind and the clouds had already become a pile of dirt now? How many shocking geniuses had already become the dust of history now? Besides the supreme saint kings that possessed eternal life, who else could resist the invasion of time? Time was people's greatest enemy. At this moment, after such a long time, they had welcomed an epoch-making genius. This genius had created a miracle that no one had ever done in 10 billion years. 10 billion years, how many super experts of Earth Stage 8 and even Earth Stage 9 had been born during this period? However, there had never been a genius who had passed the 10th level of the Sword God's palace. The ratio between the two wasn't difficult to calculate. The latter was countless times rarer than the peerless experts of Earth Stage 9. Now, this genius had finally arrived. As soon as he appeared, he made a stunning appearance. That was the 16th level of the Sword God's palace. He had actually passed it. An unstoppable fanaticism rose in everyone's heart. Even the old monsters of Earth Stage 8 and the terrifying existences of half a step into Earth Stage 9 couldn't stop the fanaticism and awe in their hearts. This kind of shock was unparalleled. No one could control it, not even the experts of half a step into Earth Stage 9. This is a genius destined to be remembered by history. Time had abandoned everyone, but it wouldn't abandon such a genius. Even if he fell in the future, he was destined to leave a heavy mark in history. The manor instantly turned into a turbulent ocean, and the huge sound waves drowned out everything. There were only 2 levels left. Could Lin Feng pass them? Time passed slowly. People quieted down and stared at the transparent virtual interface with excited and fanatical eyes. Their eyes were fixed on the flashing numbers. They forgot about the experts around them. They forgot about everything. There was only the flashing numbers in their eyes. In an unknown place, a pair of eyes were watching everything. A trace of surprise flashed through the eyes of the owner of the eyes. Then, it turned into a big smile. I didn't expect you to pass the 16th level. Your talent really surprises me. It seems that I've really found a treasure this time. He had never recruited a warlord before. Now, the only warlord he had recruited was such an extraordinary genius. What could make him happier than this? He couldn't remember how many years it had been since he had been so happy. As a Saint King, and one of the top Saint Kings, there were too few things that could affect his mood. However, he immediately thought of something. His smiling face frowned slightly. His contracted demonic beast. Then, he relaxed his frown. I hope I'm overthinking. How could things be so coincidental? He slowly raised his head. His gaze penetrated the layers of space and landed on the thin figure. A smile appeared on his face again. No matter what, it was a happy thing to have such a talented warlord under his command. After an unknown period of time, the transparent virtual interface changed again. This scene didn't cause an uproar. Instead, it caused the scene to fall into a dead silence. A silent atmosphere quickly spread to every inch of space and every corner. Did Lin Feng fail? No, he succeeded. After passing the 16th level, he didn't stop. He didn't disappoint. He passed the 17th level and broke his own record. However, after the 17th level was the 18th level. There were only 18 levels in the Sword God's Palace. After 4 to 6 hours, Lin Feng took one step at a time with firm step. He finally reached the 18th level, which was the final level of the Sword God's Palace. It was said that only Saint Kings could pass the level. Now there was only one step left. The so-called, only Saint Kings could pass the level, might not be completely correct. However, the difficulty of the level could be seen from this sentence. After all, this was what the Thunder Punishment Saint King said when he founded the Sword God's Palace. No one would doubt the words of the high and mighty Saint King. In that case, this young man who had created an unprecedented and crazy miracle had no choice but to stop moving forward? For some reason, people suddenly felt a deep sense of regret. They felt very sad. Was the miracle finally over? Chapter 585. The air around the manor had already solidified, and the place was deathly silent. When Lin Feng reached the 18th stage, the final stage, everyone could not help but sigh deeply. Among those sighs, there was a trace of unwillingness. They felt unwillingness for Lin Feng. It was no exaggeration to say that Lin Feng had used his outstanding performance to conquer everyone present. Even the proudest of geniuses had to lower their proud heads before Lin Feng. When Biqiong, Bloodshed, Hidden Sword, and the other top 10 geniuses of the Bloodridge continent, who were originally in the limelight, suddenly became mediocre in front of Lin Feng's stunning performance, Lin Feng used facts to tell everyone that he was the king of the younger generation of the Bloodridge continent. Even the genius who was vaguely considered to be the number one, the young master of the Heavenly Dawn Pavilion, Shang Wuhan, seemed to be not worth mentioning. The existence of a genius like Lin Feng was the glory of an era, but also the sorrow of an era. Everyone looked at the transparent virtual interface with complicated emotions. Although the surroundings were deathly silent, they could vaguely hear long sighs. In the palace of the 18th stage, Lin Feng did not know how great of a commotion he had caused and how many super experts he had attracted. At this moment, after seeing the 18th stage's question, he could not help but be stunned for a long time. Space-time law. Before this, Lin Feng had guessed many results, but he did not expect that the 18th stage's question would be related to spacetime law. Spacetime law was the combination of spacetime law and spacetime law. The description of this question was very simple, with only a few sentences. It required the challenger to completely separate a strand of spacetime energy within 2 hours. If the requirement was not completed after the time limit, it would be considered a failure. This was the shortest description of all the questions Lin Feng had experienced, but its difficulty was undoubtedly the highest. It could even be said to be an unsolvable question. Of course, the so-called unsolvable here was for almost all Earth saints. As for Saint Kings, the moment every Saint King became a Saint King, they would be bestowed with Saint King will as well as the power to control time and space. In other words, the law of time and the law of space were the foundation of becoming a Saint King. Aside from the law of time and the law of space, Saint Kings could also control at least one other law, which was known as the natal law. The natal law was the trump card that Saint Kings relied on to survive. It was just like how an Earth Saint could advance to the complete Earth Saint realm after comprehending 3 laws to perfection. To a Saint King, the natal law was no different from the 3 major laws that the complete Earth Saint realm mainly cultivated. It was precisely because the laws of time and the laws of space were the foundation of becoming a Saint King that the lifespan of every single Saint King was eternal, and every single Saint King possessed the ability to teleport. Other than Saint Kings, only those who cultivated in the law of time had a long lifespan. Only those who cultivated in the law of space could teleport. Of course, there was one type of person that had to be excluded, and that was the descendants of Saint Kings. As the descendants of Saint Kings, they would inherit a portion of the Saint King's abilities. Therefore, generally speaking, the descendants of Saint Kings would more or less have some talent in the laws of time and the law of space, as well as the natal law of Saint Kings. However, the more generations passed, the weaker the talent they inherited. Therefore, only the few generations after Saint Kings had the most outstanding talent in the laws of time and the law of space. After that, it could be ignored. However, even if these people were included, those below Saint Kings who possessed the ability to teleport or had an extremely long lifespan were still shockingly rare. There were very few experts in the world who possessed talent in the laws of time and the law of space. Those who could cultivate them to perfection were even rarer. It was not an exaggeration to say that they could be counted on one's fingers. Those who could cultivate both the laws of time and the law of space to perfection were even rarer. There might not even be one in 100 million years. Lin Feng happened to be one of them. Not only did he cultivate in the laws of time, but he also cultivated in the laws of space. In fact, he had already comprehended the laws of space to perfection. In this aspect, it was probably difficult to find anyone in the entire Sui-Yang realm who could compare to him. Therefore, this almost unsolvable problem was the simplest in Lin Feng's eyes. Stripping off a strand of the power of time and space did not require one to comprehend both to perfection. As long as one comprehended one of them thoroughly, they would be able to strip it off. Lin Feng, who had ascended the stairway to heaven many times, was naturally very familiar with stripping it off. It was extremely easy. No wonder it is said that only Saint Kings can pass through the 18th level. Lin Feng somewhat understood the meaning of this sentence now. Every Saint King could control the laws of time and the law of space. Naturally, they could solve this problem. Although the descendants of Saint Kings were not Saint Kings, it was still possible to classify them as Saint Kings. Other than Saint Kings and their descendants, there were other super experts in the world who had comprehended the laws of time and the law of space to perfection. Lin Feng did not think that he was the only one. However, he was sure that there were only a few such geniuses. In addition to the difficulty of the Sword God's Palace, Even if these geniuses who had comprehended the laws of time and the law of space to perfection came, they would all fail at the previous levels. No one could make it to the 18th level. Naturally, they were not qualified to answer this question. Therefore, it was not baseless to say that only Saint Kings could pass through the 18th level. Unfortunately, Lin Feng seemed to exist to create miracles. This final level was far from being able to stop Lin Feng's progress. His gaze changed from astonishment to calmness. He was even calmer and more confident than when he had challenged the level in the past. The corners of his mouth also gently pulled into a smile, which was exceptionally charming. The law of space. Perfection. The law of time. 55%. Under such conditions, what else did Lin Feng have to worry about? Slowly closing his eyes, Lin Feng's consciousness did not even enter space number 1. He began to peel off the wisp of the power of time and space on the spot. 2 hours? No, that's too long. Perhaps half an hour is more suitable. In a place where no one was paying attention, the Thunder Punishment Saint King was bored to death as he stared at the endless stream of people outside the manor. He no longer paid any attention to Lin Feng. To him, it was already a pleasant surprise that Lin Feng could pass the 17th stage. As for the 18th stage, he did not hold much hope because he knew what the 18th stage's question was. For a genius born in the planar world, he did not expect Lin Feng to have the talent for the law of time or the law of space. He also did not expect Lin Feng to be able to cultivate one of the laws to perfection. He knew that it was not realistic. Even so, he was still hesitant about whether he should give the reward for passing the 18th level to Lin Feng. This was because, strictly speaking, the 18th level was no longer a test of the same type of talent. It was a test of pure talent for cultivating the laws of time and space. This was not fair to Lin Feng. This little guy is really giving me a headache. The Thunder Punishment Saint King rubbed his temples, feeling a little helpless. Just as the Thunder Punishment Saint King was having a headache, a cry of surprise suddenly came from the silent manor, breaking the dead silence. An old man at the early stage of Earth Stage 8 was looking in a direction in shock. He cried out involuntarily, "Refining magnate, Gu Tianfang." It was hard to imagine what could make an expert at the early stage of Earth Stage 8 lose his composure like this. However, it happened, and it was seen by countless people. Many people did not know what was going on, but they subconsciously followed the old man's gaze. After the cry of surprise, the old man immediately flew up. His movement was so fast that it made people speechless. His action seemed to have caused a chain reaction. Many experts, who had reached the 8th level of Earth Stage 8, flew out from all corners and flew in the same direction, leaving beautiful tracks in the air. This included those experts who had been hiding in the crowd and kept a low profile. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In this quiet place, the sound of people flying through the air became the main melody. Welcome to the Sword God Palace, Senior Go. Welcome to the Sword God Palace, Senior Go. The voices were uneven and scattered. It was not as spectacular as the crowd around them. However, it was a different story if all of them were experts at the 8th level of Earth Stage 8. Hundreds of experts at the 8th level of Earth Stage 8, including Du Yu, Wei Fu, Emperor Mang, Wu Ju, Bing Huang, Immortal Huyang, and a few other experts who were half a step into the 9th level of Earth Stage 8, lowered their noble heads in front of this man. They were like humble servants, showing the highest respect to this middle-aged man. As for the experts at the peak of the Earth Saint realm, they were not even qualified to bow to this man. Hiss! Gasps could be heard from time to time. Refining magnate Gu Tianfang. Most people had never heard of this name. However, if it was the pavilion master of the refining pavilion, one-armed craftsman god, everyone would know him. That's right. He was the pavilion master of the refining pavilion, one of the 3 ancient forces in the Sui-Yang realm. One-armed craftsman god, Gu Tianfang. In addition to his identity as an advanced heaven stage craftsman, Gu Tianfang had another identity. He was a peerless expert at the 9th level of Earth Stage 9. When Gu Tianfang's identity was exposed, there was an uproar inside and outside the manor. No one knew how big the Suiyang realm was. No one could calculate the population of the Suiyang realm. It was not because the human's ability was too weak. It was because the huge number was enough to make any genius who was proficient in mathematics retreat. However, in such a vast and boundless area with such a huge population, there were only 3 great kings. It was enough to imagine how terrifying these 3 experts were. It was a kind of terror that stepped on everything in the world, dominated the fate of billions of creatures, and made everything submit to them. It was a kind of terror that stood at the top of the boundless plain. It was a kind of terror that ordinary people could not imagine. For people, saint kings were illusory. Their power was far less direct and soul-stirring than the 3 great kings. And now, this king, who only existed in legends, had arrived. He only came for one purpose. Everyone knew that his purpose was the young man in the Sword God Palace. Chapter 586. Even though the distance between the Bloodridge continent and the Suiyang continent was hundreds of millions of miles, an ordinary Earth saint would not be able to cross it in his lifetime. However, Gu Tianfang had only used less than 2 hours to arrive here. Whether he had relied on his extreme speed or some other means, it was enough to prove how terrifying he was. It should be known that these were 2 continents in the Suiyang realm, not 2 continents in the plain world. A single continent in the Suiyang realm was probably even larger than the continents of millions of planar worlds combined. Has the legendary Earth Level 9 expert's speed reached such a terrifying level? Everyone looked at Gu Tianfang with deep reverence. Just his speed alone was already so frightening. Then, how terrifying would his destructive power be? At this moment, even the most arrogant genius had to lower his head and pay his respect to this legendary figure. Gu Tianfang looked around and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Then, he smiled faintly. I didn't expect this place to be so lively. Although no one here had reached a level comparable to him, it was undeniable that the number of experts here was shockingly large. There were more than 100 experts who had reached the Earth Level 8. Even with the rich foundation of the weapon refining pavilion, they did not have so many experts. I'm here for Lin Feng. You don't have to pay attention to me. Gu Tianfang waved his hand. His every movement carried an irresistible majesty. Of course, no one dared to really ignore Gu Tianfang. However, since Gu Tianfang had said so, they did not dare to disturb him. However, they put a considerable amount of attention on Gu Tianfang. This was one of the 3 giants of the Suiyang realm. He was like a king in the mortal world. Who could ignore him? Who dared to ignore him? For most of the people present, it was an honor and happiness to be able to see the legendary one-armed craftsman god. It was like a mortal meeting a king. It was something worth rejoicing and reminiscing for a lifetime. The people present seemed to have taken stimulant. Their spirits and appearances were refreshed. They were grateful to Lin Feng. If it were not for Lin Feng, how could they have the chance to see this legendary figure? As for Du Yu, Wei Fu, Emperor Mang, and Wu Ju, who were originally high and mighty, they didn't even have the right to speak. In front of this king who controlled the fate of billions of lives, their status wasn't much higher than ant. The only thing they could do was to accompany this king in the most humble manner. Soon, things changed again. As the only protagonist present, Gu Tianfang had a faint smile on his lips, but inexplicably, he frowned slightly and looked in a direction behind him. The people who had been paying attention to Gu Tianfang followed his gaze almost immediately. A figure wearing a golden-threaded demonic crown slowly walked over with light step. Even though he was in midair, his steps were still calm and unhurried. He was like a star in the night sky, suddenly appearing and attracting everyone's attention. In the air, he walked over step by step, as if he was stepping on an invisible staircase. There was a perfect and intoxicating smile on his face from beginning to end. His handsome face, dignified aura, and a trace of vicissitudes of life caused everyone's gaze to be firmly attracted. It was difficult for them to look away. In comparison, Gu Tianfang didn't have the demeanor of a king other than his dignified aura and unique one arm. The latter, on the other hand, was like a natural king. His innate temperament was subduing. Dan Chenzi. Gu Tianfang stared at the newcomer, somewhat surprised and regretful. I didn't expect you to come so quickly. Dan Chenzi, the leader of the Pill Pavilion, one of the three ancient forces in the Suiyang realm, and the leader of the three giants. In the billions of realms, in the secret land of immortality, no one in the world could compare to him. With the Pill Pavilion's current reputation and Dan Chenzi's status, it was no exaggeration to say that he was the number one person in the Suiyang realm. The moment Gu Tianfang opened his mouth, Dan Chenzi, who was originally pacing back and forth, suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already beside Gu Tianfang. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and the corner of his lips curled up slightly. If I was a step late, then perhaps this genius would have already been taken by Brother Go. If that's the case, then how would I dare to delay? Though these words were spoken in a friendly tone, they contained a trace of irresistible majesty. Gu Tianfang didn't explain or refute. He only said indifferently, "My artifact pavilion is determined to obtain this person." It was as if he was stating a fact, but also as if he was expressing his determination. It's best not to rush to a conclusion. Dan Chenzi's smile didn't fade. You should know that the Pill Pavilion is more attractive than your artifact pavilion. This was a fact that no one could refute. So what? Gu Tianfang was expressionless. I believe that Lin Feng is a smart person. Any smart person should know that if he joins the Pill Pavilion, he may become the number one person in the world in the future. If he joins your artifact pavilion, the best result he can achieve is at most second, or even third, Dan Chenzi said as if nothing had happened. I believe that he will make a wise choice. Gu Tianfang argued, but you seem to have forgotten that you've already invited Ling Haotian. Dan Chenzi shrugged. So what? No one would complain about having too many geniuses. Do you think that the Pill Pavilion has the ability to control two extraordinary geniuses at the same time? Gu Tianfang said indifferently. When two tigers fight, one of them is bound to be injured. Lin Feng hadn't appeared yet, but these two giants who controlled the fate of billions of people in the Suiyang realm had already started fighting. The surrounding people wisely chose to shut up. In front of these two giants, it wasn't their place to criticize. Otherwise, these two giants wouldn't mind teaching them how to behave. However, just because these people didn't speak didn't mean that no one else would. A straightforward laugh came from afar. Gu Tianfang, Dan Chenzi, are you sure that Lin Feng won't choose our overturned formation sky? As the laughter fell, a middle-aged man in a large white robe flashed past like a stream of light. In the blink of an eye, he stopped in front of Gu Tianfang and Dan Chenzi. He said with a mocking expression, Dan Chenzi, I won't say anything. Gu Tianfang, your artifact pavilion is about to fall apart. What right do you have to compete with our overturned formation sky? Sui Wuxin, the decline of the artifact pavilion has nothing to do with you. Gu Tianfang glanced at the newcomer. Even if the artifact pavilion has fallen as you say, we are not afraid of any challengers. At least, the overturned formation sky is not qualified to scare us. Without a doubt, the newcomer was the lord of the overturned formation sky, one of the three giants of the Suiyang realm, Sui Wuxin. At this point, the three giants of the Suiyang realm, the three most powerful people in the world, were all present. Gu Tianfang, don't deceive yourself and others. The artifact pavilion is no longer the colossus that dominated billions of planes in ancient times. The current artifact pavilion is only a pitiful worm that is struggling at death's door. Sui Wuxin didn't have any scruples in his words. He didn't hide his disdain at all. I'm sure that it won't be long before the artifact pavilion falls apart and becomes a part of the history of the Suiyang realm. I think that many people are looking forward to this day. Gu Tianfang clenched his fists and forced himself to calm down. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "No need to say anything more. The artifact pavilion is determined to get this person. No matter the price, we won't hesitate." These words came from Gu Tianfang's mouth, so the weight was naturally different. Sui Wuxin snorted. He couldn't stand Gu Tianfang's attitude. The artifact pavilion had clearly shown signs of decline and was in danger of falling apart at any time, but Gu Tianfang was still so domineering. Sui Wuxin hated this kind of dominance. Moreover, the relationship between the overturned formation sky and the artifact pavilion had never been harmonious. Every lord of the overturned formation sky and the artifact pavilion were mortal enemies. He naturally couldn't stand Gu Tianfang's disregard for him. In his opinion, the artifact pavilion no longer deserved to be called one of the three ancient factions and should have been kicked out long ago. As for Gu Tianfang, the pavilion master of the blacksmith pavilion, his status was naturally lower than his. "Don't be delusional," Sui Wuxin sneered. "Lin Feng is destined to be the man of the overturned formation sky. Besides," a meaningful smile appeared on his face, "if the artifact pavilion really gets him, I don't mind using the overturned formation sky's power to hasten the artifact pavilion's demise." Gu Tianfang's pupils shrank and he flew into a rage. "You're courting death." A monstrous aura erupted like a volcano. A trace of fear flashed in Sui Wuxin's eyes, but it soon turned into a sneer. "What, you want to fight?" Although he was a bit weaker than Gu Tianfang, it wouldn't be easy for Gu Tianfang to defeat him. If he was given enough time to set up a formation, he was even confident that he could defeat Gu Tianfang. After all, formations were his forte. "You'd better not force me," Gu Tianfang said, trying to suppress his anger. Countless experts looked at each other. The thick smell of gunpowder made everyone swallow a mouthful of saliva. Even the 8th-level Earth cultivators couldn't help but feel deeply worried. This was a 9th-level Earth cultivator. If they went all out, this place wouldn't even be able to withstand a single slap. For the crowd, a battle between two 9th-level Earth cultivators was definitely a disaster, a nightmare. In a battle between giants, it was the mortals who would suffer. For a 9th-level Earth cultivator, even an 8th-level Earth cultivator was no different from a mortal. They looked forward to a battle between 9th-level Earth cultivators, but they definitely didn't want it to happen in front of them. At the same time, they also sincerely exclaimed, "This Lin Feng hasn't even appeared, but he almost caused a big fight between two giants." Although the two giants had been in conflict for a long time and were hostile to each other, Lin Feng was only a fuse at best. However, even if it was only a fuse, it was still something to be proud of. Chapter 587. The two giants didn't fight in the end. Not to mention that it wasn't time to shed all pretense of cordiality, the special nature of this place didn't allow them to act recklessly. The Sword God's palace was built by the Holy King himself. It wasn't a place where they could act recklessly. They had reason to believe that if the Sword God's palace was damaged because of their fight, the Supreme Holy King would be happy to have a heart-to-heart talk with them. Sui Wuxin's face was gloomy. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "Gu Tianfang, I'll let you go this time. If you dare to disrespect me again, humph." He didn't hide his threat. Gu Tianfang wasn't affected at all. He looked at Sui Wuxin indifferently, without any intention of compromising. Gu Tianfang was proud. Even though the weapon-refining pavilion had declined and was at the bottom of the three ancient powers, the weapon-refining pavilion's glory was something the elixir pavilion and the overturning formation sky never had. Speaking of history, the weapon-refining pavilion's history was definitely longer than the elixir pavilion and the overturning formation sky. When the weapon-refining pavilion dominated the world, the elixir pavilion was just a toddler learning to walk, and the overturning formation sky didn't even have a shadow. When the weapon-refining pavilion declined and the elixir pavilion rose, the geniuses of the overturning formation sky stood out among countless powers and gradually caught up to become one of the three ancient powers. Gu Tianfang's pride came from the weapon-refining pavilion's glorious and rich history. This was something the elixir pavilion and the overturning formation sky could never compare to. Compared to the weapon-refining pavilion and the elixir pavilion, although the overturning formation sky was also called an ancient power, it was at best a new power. Calm down, both of you. There are too many people here. If what happened today spreads, I'm afraid it will damage the image of the weapon-refining pavilion and the overturning formation sky. It's very inappropriate. At this time, Danshenzi played the good guy and tried to persuade them. He chose the right time to put the elixir pavilion out of the matter and establish a positive image. In my opinion, why don't the two of you stop fighting and make peace? Of course, Danshenzi would not be so kind. However, many astute people could see that Gu Tianfang and Sui Wuxin would not be able to fight. He might as well play the good guy and pretend to persuade both sides so that they could have a way out of the embarrassing situation. Moreover, he could also win the gratitude of the crowd. Why not? If he really wanted to persuade Sui Wuxin, he would have stood out when Gu Tianfang and Sui Wuxin were in conflict. Why would he wait until now? Gu Tianfang gave Danshenzi a deep look, then indifferently withdrew his gaze and no longer spoke. Sui Wuxin snorted coldly, but he didn't dare to embarrass Danshenzi. He could only swallow his harsh words. Danshenzi's strength was also unfathomable. Sui Wuxin was far more wary of him than of Gu Tianfang. Moreover, he knew that his biggest competitor today was not the craftsmanship pavilion, but the elixir pavilion. Other than the pill pavilion, there was no other force in the world that could compete with their overturned formation sky for this amazing genius. As for the crafting pavilion, he had already ruled it out. As long as Lin Feng had a brain, he wouldn't choose the crafting pavilion, which was already on its last legs. Therefore, his wariness towards Danshenzi had risen to another level. He also reminded himself that he didn't need to pay too much attention to Gu Tianfang. The one he really needed to pay attention to was Danshenzi. Phew, the hostile atmosphere finally disappeared. The surrounding people also breathed a sigh of relief. Although they didn't think that the two 9th-level Earth Realm experts wouldn't really fight, there was always an accident. If the two impulsively fought, then the surrounding people would be the first to suffer. Facing the aftershock of a battle between 9th-level Earth Realm experts, even a half-step 9th-level Earth Realm expert like Emperor Mang wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow, let alone the rest of the people. If the two really fought, then no matter who won in the end, there was a 99% chance that the people present would be buried with them. Fortunately, the two were still rational. Although they were fighting verbally, they didn't lose their heads in anger and do anything irreparable. At the same time, they couldn't help but smile bitterly. This Lin Feng hasn't appeared yet, but he's already caused a fierce battle. What will happen if he appears? Some people were even considering if they should sneak away first. If that kind of thing really happened later, they wouldn't even have a place to cry. For a moment, everyone looked at the transparent virtual interface again. Not bad, I've already stripped off 90% of the power of space. As I expected, the power of spacetime is exactly the same as the power of law in the Shuntian sect's Heaven Stairway world. It seems that the Heaven Stairway world was really created by a holy king. Lin Feng thought of the heaven stairway world of the Shuntian sect. It was just as mysterious, just as vast and boundless, and had its own independent space. Other than a few differences in the interior design, everything else was more or less the same. Perhaps only a supreme saint king would have the ability to create such a space. It wasn't the first time that Lin Feng had stripped off the power of law. The fusion of the power of spacetime in the 18th level was much higher than the fusion of the power of law in the 5th level of the Heaven Stairway world. It was comparable to the fusion of the power of law in the 6th level of the Heaven Stairway world. The difficulty of stripping off the power of law was 10 times higher. However, Lin Feng had already comprehended the power of law to perfection. Naturally, it wasn't that difficult. At most, it would just take a little more time. To be exact, for Lin Feng, the difficulty of the 18th level of the Sword God's Palace was far less than the difficulty of climbing the 6th level of the Heaven Stairway world. The reason was very simple. The 18th level of the Sword God's Palace only required stripping off the power of spacetime within a fixed period of time. On the other hand, the 6th level of the Heaven Stairway world required stripping off the power of law. Just this point alone increased the difficulty by 10 times. In addition, the pressure of each step in the Heaven Stairway world was extremely strong. It was a problem to even stand under such pressure, let alone concentrate on extracting the power of law. In comparison, the 18th level of the Sword God's Palace was nothing. After about 10 minutes, Lin Feng suddenly opened his eyes and a smile appeared on his face. He had succeeded. Looking at the too smooth and looming power of law floating in front of him, Lin Feng felt a sense of loss. This was the 18th level. There were no more levels after that. This also meant that his challenge was finally over. He slowly stood up and injected the two floating power of law into the pitch-black stone tablet. In the next moment, the pitch-black stone tablet shone brightly. A dazzling 5-colored light suddenly burst out. The light penetrated the palace, penetrated the space, and reflected on the surroundings of the manor in the Sui-Yang realm. The huge Sword God's Palace actually started to tremble slightly. If one were to observe it carefully, they would discover that this independent building outside of the Sui-Yang realm was gradually breaking away from its original interface with the Sui-Yang realm. It had become a truly independent plane. Rumble. Everyone panicked, feeling incomparably terrified by the voice that suddenly sounded in their mind. The earth was trembling, the wind and clouds in the sky were changing, and the 5-colored light dyed the world in 5 colors. Apart from that, there was nothing else. This kind of mysterious and unknown change caused people to feel uneasy. However, no one could stop all of this from happening. Even the 3 giants were powerless. Not far away, a figure who was leisurely lying down suddenly stood up and looked at the pure 5-colored area with incomparable shock. His face, which would not change even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him, actually revealed a trace of deep shock. He really passed through. In the next moment, the figure disappeared. Where is this? After Lin Feng disappeared from the palace of the 18th level, he suddenly felt weightless and suffocated. He looked around carefully and could not help but blurt out in shock, "Outer space." In the desolate space, there was a suffocating and despairing coldness and darkness. Only at the end of one's line of sight, in the distant horizon, one could see huge spheres of different sizes. Those spheres were moving according to a certain pattern, and had been moving for an unknown number of years. Further away, there were flashing bright spots that were slowly changing their positions, forming all kinds of dreamy scenes that never stop. This was a shocking scene that was extremely visually impactful. Outer space. A surprised voice sounded in Lin Feng's ears. Turning around, Lin Feng immediately said respectfully, "My lord." With his current strength, he was completely capable of surviving in the harsh environment of outer space. With his understanding of the laws of space, he could transmit his voice without any medium. In fact, space itself was a medium. This name is very appropriate to describe this place. The thunder punishment holy monarch smiled. However, we are more used to describing it as spatial turbulence. Lin Feng's eyes widened. This is spatial turbulence? Outer space was spatial turbulence. Lin Feng felt as if his worldview had collapsed. The thunder punishment holy monarch nodded, thinking that Lin Feng was frightened. He smiled and said, "To an earth sage, spatial turbulence is extremely dangerous. However, don't worry, with me here, this spatial turbulence won't be a threat to your safety." Spatial turbulence was the battlefield of holy monarchs. Only in this place could holy monarchs fight without restraint. Otherwise, whether it was the Sui-Yang realm, the Rebirth realm, or the Five Elements' secret grounds, they wouldn't be able to withstand a battle of this level. Of course, if I'm not here, you must not enter the spatial turbulence. Otherwise, even with my abilities, it would be difficult to find you in this boundless spatial turbulence, let alone rescue you. Lin Feng nodded solemnly. I will remember. Alright, I'm meeting you this time for the reward. Let's not talk about spatial turbulence for now. The thunder punishment holy monarch smiled and said, Lin Feng, do you still remember what I said not long ago? Hearing this, Lin Feng's eyes flashed with a hint of anticipation. The thunder punishment holy monarch smiled faintly. The surprise I was referring to is this. He slowly raised his palm, and in his palm lay a colorful object that looked like a fried dough twist. What is that? Lin Feng asked curiously. The Sword God's Palace. The thunder punishment holy monarch looked at Lin Feng and said with a smile, Your reward for passing the 18th stage is the entire Sword God's Palace. Domineering. Hearing this, Lin Feng's eyes widened in shock. Chapter 588. Even if Lin Feng used his imagination to its fullest, he would never have imagined that the reward for passing the 18th level would be the Sword God's Palace. What was the Sword God's Palace? It was a planar structure personally created by the Sage King. It could even be said to be a vast plane. Giving away a plane that he had created with his own hands so casually was simply too extravagant. Lin Feng did not doubt that even the Supreme Sage King could not ignore the existence of a plane. Why, are you surprised? Looking at Lin Feng's shocked expression, the Thunder Punishment Sage King could not help but feel a little proud. He felt quite accomplished to be able to shock this unbelievably calm little fellow to this extent. Lin Feng's voice was a little hoarse. My lord, isn't this reward a little too generous? The Thunder Punishment Sage King laughed. If it's not generous, how can it show that I value you? Without waiting for Lin Feng to speak, the Thunder Punishment Sage King waved his sleeves and said, Don't worry, this is the reward that I have decided on long ago. No matter who passes the 18th level, the reward will be the Sword God's Palace, so you don't have to feel burdened. After a pause, his expression gradually became serious. Next, listen to me talk about the wonderful uses of the Sword God's Palace. I'm all ears. The appearance and size of the Sword God's Palace can be changed according to the owner's wishes. The largest can be 1/10 the size of the northeast region, and the smallest can be 1/10,000th the size of a speck of dust. It has all the functions of the Noah's boat and is much more powerful than the highest grade Noah's boat. The only drawback is that its defense and speed are closely related to its owner's strength and are not fixed. If its owner is weak, its defense and speed will be extremely weak, and vice versa. The Thunder Punishment Sage King slowly explained the various things about the Sword God's Palace. For example, if an Earth Stage 7 Perfection Earthly Sage controls it, its defense can at most withstand the attack of an Earth Stage 8 Perfection Earthly Sage. Its speed is also comparable to an Earth Stage 8 Perfection Earthly Sage. If I control it, very few people in the entire Sui-Yang realm can break its defense. It can go anywhere with just a thought. Hearing this, Lin Feng was not disappointed. Instead, he was extremely surprised. Having the sword god's palace was equivalent to having an auxiliary treasure that could grow with its owner's strength. Don't be so happy so early. This prince hasn't finished speaking yet. The Thunder Punishment Saint ruler smiled faintly. If you think that's all the functions of the sword god's palace, then you're sorely mistaken. Actually, the first few things don't count for much. Its greatest ability is time acceleration. Time acceleration! Lin Feng exclaimed in shock. Waves of shock surged in his heart. So far, this was the first space he had seen in this world other than Space Number 1 that had the ability to accelerate time. He thought that time acceleration was a unique ability of Space Number 1, something that no one else in the world had the opportunity to enjoy. It was also the source of his confidence and confidence. But now, the Thunder Punishment Saint King's words were like a bolt from the blue, instantly crushing his rock-solid heart. For a moment, he panicked. The Thunder Punishment Saint King looked at Lin Feng in confusion. Seeing that Lin Feng's reaction was a little strange, he did not think too much about it. He only thought that Lin Feng was shocked by this news. After all, to a mortal, time acceleration was indeed inconceivable. That's right. Time acceleration. Every Saint King can control the power of time and space. Naturally, they have the ability to affect the flow of time in a space. Moreover, this space was created by me personally. The Thunder Punishment Saint King's lips curled up slightly. There was a hint of pride in his deep eyes. And the Sword God's Palace has the ability to accelerate time by 10 times. Among all the Saint Kings in the 7 longevity secret zones, very few could achieve a 10-fold time acceleration. He indeed had the right to be proud. Even if it was only a 10-fold time acceleration, not every Saint King could achieve it, let alone a 10-fold time acceleration. Lin Feng was stunned. 10-fold. Naturally, the Thunder Punishment Saint King interpreted Lin Feng's expression as shock. He had an even brighter smile on his face. You didn't hear wrong. It's 10-fold. 1 day in the outside world is equivalent to 10 days in the Sword God's Palace. If you cultivate in the Sword God's Palace, I don't need to say more. You should be able to guess the result yourself, right? Lin Feng's eyes lit up. He had misunderstood. The Sword God's Palace did have the ability to accelerate time. It was similar to the current Space Number 1. However, in terms of time acceleration, it was far inferior. Hearing the Thunder Punishment Saint King's tone, Lin Feng could guess without asking. A 10-fold time acceleration was already very exaggerated. When the bad news entered Lin Feng's ears, it was like the sound of heaven. It was simply too wonderful. He was very happy and even excited because he had not lost his advantage. The exaggerated time acceleration ratio of the Space Number 1 was still unique. Thank you, my lord. Lin Feng's face was full of smiles. He was absolutely sincere because the news that the Thunder Punishment Saint King had unintentionally revealed was too important to him. He thought to himself, this reward is really good. With the Sword God's Palace, I don't have to worry about exposing the Space Number 1 in the future. Without this worry, he could enter the Space Number 1 without any worries in the future. Not only could he enter with his consciousness, but he could also enter with his body. After all, the Sword God's Palace had the same effect. Others would only think that he had entered the Sword God's Palace. Who would guess that he had actually entered the Space Number 1? Compared to the Space Number 1, even if the Sword God's Palace was exposed, he did not have to worry too much. After all, this was a treasure bestowed by the Saint King. Even if someone coveted it, they had to have the guts to make a move. It seems that you are very satisfied with this reward. The Thunder Punishment Saint King smiled. Then, from today onwards, it belongs to you. As soon as he finished speaking, the colorful object that looked like a fried dough twist left the Thunder Punishment Saint King's palm and slowly flew toward Lin Feng. The Thunder Punishment Saint King said, plant your spiritual imprint on it. Lin Feng did as he was told and engraved his spiritual imprint on the object. Immediately, all the information about the Sword God's palace was transmitted to his mind. He tried to change the appearance of the Sword God's palace according to his will. As expected, the Sword God's palace changed rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it covered Lin Feng's body and turned into a colorful robe. "It's too gaudy." Lin Feng frowned. Soon after, he withdrew the 5 colors on the clothes. When he looked at it again, it was indeed much more pleasing to the eye. "All right, Lin Feng, the reward has been bestowed to you. You can leave now." The Thunder Punishment Saint King waved his hand. "If there is anything else, just contact me through the Thunder Punishment token." Lin Feng lowered his head. "Yes, my lord. Remember, you only have 100,000 years. After 100,000 years, you must return to fulfill your duty." As soon as the Thunder Punishment Saint King finished speaking, Lin Feng didn't even have time to speak before his vision blurred, and he disappeared from the spot. Not far away, the Thunder Punishment Saint King's gaze pierced through space and looked at Lin Feng, who had returned to the Suiyang realm. A look of anticipation appeared on his face. "You are the genius who passed the 18th level of the Sword God's palace. Don't disappoint me." In the manner. When Lin Feng engraved his spiritual imprint on the Sword God's palace, the strange colorful light that filled the sky instantly disappeared without a trace. The panicked crowd gradually calmed down. "It's gone. The interface is gone." A panicked voice sounded. Everyone looked at the transparent virtual interface. However, this time they couldn't see the transparent virtual interface. The place was empty. Everyone looked at each other and had a bad feeling. For a moment, the place fell into dead silence again. The transparent virtual interface had existed for 10 billion years. Why did it mysteriously disappear? What did its disappearance mean? Was it related to Lin Feng? Did Lin Feng pass the 18th level? Or the disappearance of the transparent virtual interface was caused by Lin Feng passing the 18th level? Everyone was deep in thought and their brows were deeply furrowed. Huang Wenbing and Jing Ting were worried. The sudden change in front of them made them even more worried about Lin Feng's situation. In the center of the crowd, the 3 great leaders were instantly energized and secretly prepared. "Boss!" An excited voice woke everyone up. As the voice sounded, a gentlewoman's voice followed. "Lin Feng. Brother Lin. Young Master Lin." The few voices more or less contained a trace of joy and relief. A young and ordinary-looking figure suddenly appeared in front of them. Their voices were heard by everyone. "Lin Feng." The entire world instantly quieted down. Inside and outside the huge manor, one could hear a pin drop. A dense mass of gazes converged over from all directions, and they interweaved into a blazing light that descended onto the extremely ordinary young figure. The gazes carried a sense of exploration, curiosity, and shock. Beside the dry well, Lin Feng had just been sent back by the Thunder Punishment Holy King and was instantly stunned by the scene in front of him. Hiss! He sucked in a breath of cold air and wiped his eyes. Immediately, the corner of his mouth could not help but twitch. The extremely visually shocking scene in front of him gave him a big fright. He had no idea what was going on. The black mass of people in all directions and the curious gazes that looked like they were looking at a gorilla gave Lin Feng unimaginable pressure. He did not even dare to make too much noise. He only looked around very carefully and wiped his eyes again. Immediately, he softly murmured, "It's not an illusion?" No matter how many big scenes Lin Feng had seen, in front of such a strange scene, he still felt a little scared. However, his murmur instantly woke everyone up. The quiet scene was instantly filled with noise. "He's Lin Feng. The #1 genius in the world, Lin Feng. The ultimate goal of the 3 great leaders this time is him. God, he's too young. The interface just disappeared and he came out. Does this mean that he passed the 18th level?" The quiet world was instantly broken. The scene was chaotic and noisy. Chapter 589. Although the Sui-Yang realm, the reincarnation realm, and the Goldflow secret grounds were known as the secret grounds of longevity, who could truly live forever except for the Supreme Saint Kings. Generally speaking, the lifespan of an Earth Saint who cultivated the law of time and law of life was much longer than an ordinary Earth Saint. However, they could only barely qualify to be called longevity. In the end, they could not avoid being buried in the dust of history. Therefore, the appearance of the people in the Sui-Yang realm was not fixed. They would still slowly age with the passage of time. However, this change was extremely slow. Moreover, as their cultivation increased, their lifespan would be greatly increased, and their appearance might become even younger. Moreover, most people would die in battle before reaching the end of their lifespan. There were very few people who truly died of old age. At least, Lin Feng had not heard of such a person until now. In summary, appearance could often represent a person's age. For example, Lin Feng's strength on the surface was at the late stage of Earth Saint Stage 6, and he looked so young. Therefore, it was not difficult to guess his age. Lin Feng's appearance was similar to that of a mortal in his 20s. However, his calm temperament made him look more mature. With this speculation, it could be roughly analyzed that Lin Feng's age was definitely not more than 100,000 years old. 100,000 years old was undoubtedly too young in the Sui-Yang realm, which had experienced the vicissitudes of history. Many of the famous super-experts today might be nothing when they were 100,000 years old. They might still be struggling at the peak of the Supreme Being realm or the low-level Earth Saint realm. Even peerless experts like the three great leaders might not have made a name for themselves when they were 100,000 years old. However, this little guy in front of them had obtained such eye-catching achievements at such a young age. His future was even more unimaginable. Comparisons are odious. This saying was not without reason. He's too young. When I was his age, I was still working hard to become an outer court disciple of a small sect. We're all humans, but why is the gap so big? He's not even 100,000 years old, and he already has such achievements. Then, what will he be like after 100 million years? Thinking of this, the way people looked at Lin Feng gradually changed. There was a trace of respect in their eyes. This was a world where strength was respected. As long as you had the ability, you would be respected and revered by others. No one would look down on you because you were young. On the other hand, if you didn't have the ability, even if you were older than everyone else, no one would take you seriously. Looking at this scene, Lin Feng couldn't help but secretly rejoice. Fortunately, I've cultivated the 1,000 transformations illusory breathing technique to almost the level of perfection. Even an expert at the level of perfection wouldn't be able to see through my realm and age. Otherwise, he didn't dare to believe that if his cultivation at the peak of the Supreme Realm and his age of less than 50 were exposed at the same time, what kind of disaster would await him. Even so, he still felt a lingering fear in his heart. In his heart, he was truly grateful to Xie Xiaofeng. Humph! A cold snort filled with dissatisfaction entered everyone's ears. This voice was not loud, nor did it possess any offensive nature. However, it was like a clap of thunder, causing everyone's exclamations and discussions to come to an abrupt end. That was because the owner of the snort was Sui Wuxin, one of the three heavyweights. In an instant, the lively and noisy scene became so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Millions of experts trembled at the same time. Their expressions changed drastically, and they instantly shut their mouth. The might of the three heavyweights was displayed in an exquisite manner. Without moving a finger, a cold snort was enough to make millions of people's expressions change. Just a glance was enough to make millions of people uneasy. How awe-inspiring was this? This extreme dominance made one's soul tremble. However, the slightly dissatisfied Sui Wuxin's face was filled with a bright smile the next moment. As if he had teleported, he swept across the air in a graceful trajectory and appeared in front of Lin Feng in an instant. He said with a smile, "You're Lin Feng, aren't you?" Gu Tianfang and Dan Chenzi looked at each other. "If we don't act now, when will we?" Then, they appeared beside Lin Feng in the same way. Hiss, so fast. Lin Feng's pupils suddenly shrank. The terrifying speed, which was like teleportation, made Lin Feng feel deep fear and shock. The huge reaction caused by Sui Wuxin's cold snort made Lin Feng realize how powerful he was. The power that could suppress millions of people in an instant was suffocating. He took a deep breath and tried his best to remain calm. He bowed and said, "Junior Lin Feng greets seniors." Although this was the Sword God's palace and he had the support of a Saint King, who knew if these terrifying existences would lose their minds and attack him. Moreover, he wasn't sure if a Saint King would attack these mortals in the eyes of a Saint King to protect him. "Perhaps you don't recognize us. Then, let me introduce myself." Sui Wuxin smiled faintly. "I am Sui Wuxin, the Lord of Overturned Formation Heaven." It was a simple sentence without any fancy embellishment. With his status, there was no need for any embellishment at all because any embellishment was superfluous. Lin Feng's hand trembled and his eyelids twitched. "The Lord of Overturned Formation Heaven." He looked at Sui Wuxin with some shock. Overturned Formation Heaven was one of the three ancient forces. Even though Lin Feng was a newbie who had just arrived in the Suiyang realm, he deeply understood what it meant. As the Lord of Overturned Formation Heaven, Lin Feng knew what kind of existence it was. He never dreamed that such a giant would appear before him. If this person was the Lord of Overturned Formation Heaven, then the other two. He couldn't help but look at Gu Tianfang and Dan Chenzi. Could it be? He guessed the answer. "Looks like you've guessed it. That's right, I am Dan Chenzi, the House Lord of the Elixir Pavilion," Dan Chenzi said with a smile. His voice was very gentle, and his faint smile made people feel good about him. Gu Tianfang stared at Lin Feng. Gu Tianfang, the Pavilion Lord of the Blacksmith Pavilion. Lin Feng couldn't help but glance at Gu Tianfang. As a genius who had once relied on blacksmithing to make a name for himself, Lin Feng attached great importance to the profession of blacksmithing. He also had a good impression of the forces related to blacksmithing, not to mention the Blacksmith Pavilion, an ancient colossus that could be found all over the continents of the Suiyang realm. "Little brother, did you pass the 18th trial?" Sui Wuxin asked impatiently and curiously. Dan Chenzi and Gu Tianfang also stared closely at Lin Feng, hoping to hear the final answer from Lin Feng. The surroundings were silent. Millions of people looked at Lin Feng. They were very curious about Lin Feng's results, but at the same time, they were shocked by Sui Wuxin and the others' attitude. These three giants actually treated Lin Feng as equals. It was hard to imagine just how important Lin Feng was in their hearts. It should be known that these three giants stood at the pinnacle of countless realms. Lin Feng was also stunned. "It seems that outsiders don't know that I've passed the 18th trial. If that's the case..." He slowly raised his head and shook it regretfully. "The 18th trial is too difficult. If you give me a little more time, I might be able to." He didn't continue. If he said too much, he would reveal his flaws and lose more than he gained. Moreover, he did not dare to lie in front of the three big shots. Their eyesight was not something an ordinary person could compare to. Even if he revealed a slight flaw, it would be difficult to escape their eyes. He didn't directly state the result. Instead, he used words that were full of temptation to hint at something. He spoke very frankly and sincerely. What he said was also the truth, therefore, no one could find any flaws in his words, not even the three giants. Sui Wuxin carefully looked at Lin Feng and didn't find any flaws. A trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes, but then he smiled and said, "It's okay. It's said that only Saint Kings can pass the 18th trial. Little brother, you don't have to worry about it. He didn't doubt Linfeng's words because Linfeng's answer was very reasonable. Moreover, after the thunder punishment Saint King founded the Sword God's palace, he had said that only Saint Kings could pass the 18th trial. Even if he doubted Linfeng, he wouldn't doubt the Supreme Saint King. That's right. Passing the 17th trial is enough to prove how amazing you are. No one in history can compare to you. Little brother, you don't have to feel regret. Dan Chenzi replied with a smile. Although Sui Wuxin had interrupted him, his attitude didn't show the slightest dissatisfaction. He was calm and gentle from beginning to end. Even Senior Huo Guang would admit his inferiority in front of you, right? Gu Tianfang opened his mouth, but in the end, he swallowed his words. Dan Chenzi and Sui Wuxin had said what needed to be said. If he said anything more, it would be unnecessary. Pausing for a while, the smile on Dan Chenzi's face faded a little bit. He said seriously, "Little brother, with the potential you have shown, you are definitely not suitable for some small house. Then, have you ever considered joining a real top force and showing off your talent? For example, our Elixir Pavilion is very suitable for you." Before Linfeng could speak, Sui Wuxin interrupted. The Elixir Pavilion already has Ling Haotian. No matter how many resources there are, it won't be enough for 2 people. In my opinion, the formation overturning genius is the best choice for you. Right, little brother? As he spoke, he looked at Linfeng with a slight smile. This scene immediately raised the spirits of everyone present. They were all looking forward to it. The most exciting moment had finally arrived. They had been waiting for a long time to see how the 3 magnates would rope in Linfeng, what conditions they would offer, and which sect would Linfeng choose. As they had expected, Sui Wuxin was already at odds with Dan Chenzi at the very beginning. Without Ling Haotian, the Elixir Pavilion would undoubtedly be the best choice. However, with Ling Haotian, it was hard to say. It wasn't a problem because Linfeng didn't know that Dan Chenzi could have pulled Linfeng over before revealing the news. However, Sui Wuxin chose to reveal the news at this critical moment. It would undoubtedly have a huge impact on the Elixir Pavilion. After all, everyone knew that Linfeng and Ling Haotian had an invisible competition not long ago. Since the Elixir Pavilion had chosen Ling Haotian, their impression in Linfeng's heart would undoubtedly be reduced. It seems that Senior Sui has already disregarded everything in order to rope in Linfeng. He would rather offend the Elixir Pavilion than give up, everyone thought. Everyone watched and listened attentively. It was rare to see a battle between magnates. Chapter 590. As the target of Sui Wuxin's provocation, Dan Chenzi should have been furious. Instead, he said indifferently, "I think you're being biased." Biased? Sui Wuxin smiled faintly. Did I say something wrong? Before this, the Pill Pavilion had promised Ling Haotian generous conditions and invited him to join the Pill Pavilion. Ling Haotian hasn't joined yet, but the choice is in the Tower of Alchemy's hands. As long as the Tower of Alchemy accepts the offer, Ling Haotian will immediately become a member of the Tower of Alchemy. He'll be a very important member. He looked at Dan Chenzi mockingly. Is the Tower of Alchemy planning to capture both geniuses in one go? Of course, compared to Linfeng, Ling Haotian paled in comparison. Please forgive me for not agreeing with Brother Sui. Dan Chenzi, however, was calm and composed. In my opinion, this is a good thing. Even though Ling Haotian had passed the 13th stage and was extremely talented, he was still much inferior compared to little brother. The Tower of Alchemy did invite Ling Haotian, but I didn't ask him personally. After I learned of his offer, I thought it was inappropriate. Therefore, we haven't reached an agreement yet. Pausing, he looked at Linfeng and said in a tempting tone, "If you are willing to join the Tower of Alchemy, I can promise you that I will reject Ling Haotian's offer." From today onwards, we will pour all our resources into you. Towards the end, the smile on his face grew brighter. Ling Haotian, you are undoubtedly more worthy of our attention. Not only did he praise Lin Feng, but he also implied that if Lin Feng agreed to join the Tower of Alchemy, the Tower of Alchemy would reject Ling Haotian's offer. If Lin Feng was a narrow-minded person, perhaps he wouldn't be able to reject such an offer. No matter who it was, they wouldn't easily miss such a rare opportunity to strike at their opponent. Dan Chenzi, the most shrewd of the three giants, played his hand beautifully. He turned his disadvantage into an advantage with just one sentence. This wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Some of the more astute people became even more wary. Not only was Dan Chenzi's status and strength impressive, he was also terrifyingly shrewd. At the same time, they couldn't help but sympathize with Ling Haotian. If Lin Feng really chose the alchemy house, then Ling Haotian would undoubtedly be the most pitiful person. A genius who was originally favored by many was instantly abandoned. How miserable would that be? Lin Feng remained calm and collected, but he couldn't help but become vigilant. He didn't like people like Dan Chenzi. In fact, he hated them. It's better to bully a real villain than to provoke a hypocrite. A hypocrite was much scarier than a true villain. Dan Chenzi was without a doubt a hypocrite. No matter how dignified his words were, how gentle and modest he appeared, it could not change his vicious and disgusting nature. This could be seen from how he abandoned Ling Haotian without hesitation in order to rope in Lin Feng. He even suspected that if he rejected Dan Chenzi would not let the matter rest. He had to be vigilant about this. Perhaps Dan Chenzi wasn't trying to hide himself, and there was a possibility that he wasn't a threat. Otherwise, with Dan Chenzi's shrewdness, if he really wanted to hide, not many people would be able to see through him. There were two meanings behind his words. The first was that if Lin Feng accepted him, he would have the opportunity to attack Ling Haotian and show off. The second was that he was threatening Lin Feng. He was clearly telling Lin Feng that he was a hypocrite, and that if he rejected him, he would have to be prepared for the revenge of a hypocrite. Lin Feng didn't know if the truth was as he guessed, or if he was measuring the heart of a real person with his own yardstick, but he followed his own will. If he didn't like him, then he didn't like him. Even if the other party was a true and almost perfect gentleman, Lin Feng didn't want to deal with him. Plus, he never considered joining any force. Thank you for your appreciation, seniors. However, I cannot accept your ransom. Lin Feng took a deep breath and said in a low voice. Everyone was shocked by his words. Lin Feng's words didn't just reject the alchemy house. It seemed like he rejected all forces. Dan Chenzi was surprised. Little brother, are you sure you're not wrong? Sui Wuxin frowned. Little brother, you might not know what the overturning formation sky represents. Go Tianfang was deep in thought, as if he was considering something. The alchemy house, the overturning formation sky, and the crafting pavilion are famous names. The three of you are even at the top of the Suiyang realm. How can I not know what this represents? Lin Feng has heard countless people mention such a colossal force. Naturally, he understood the meaning behind it. His expression was serious as he said, but I have already joined a force. I am afraid I cannot join the Pavilion of Alchemy, the Overturn Array Sky, or the Pavilion of Craftsmanship. A force? Which force? Which force can compare to the Alchemy House, the Overturning Formation Sky, and the Crafting Pavilion? Could it be that this kid is stupid? He rejected such a good opportunity. What is he thinking? For a moment, everyone was confused by Lin Feng's answer. Sui Wuxin was very anxious. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly stopped. Someone seemed to be transmitting a message to him. After a few breaths, he calmed down and smiled again. If the force you're talking about is the Shuntian sect, then you can rest assured. Joining the overturning formation sky and maintaining your identity as a disciple of the Shuntian sect do not conflict. As long as you are willing to join the overturning formation sky, we don't mind you taking on the identity of a disciple of the Shuntian sect. Hearing this, Danshinzi immediately organized his thoughts. The alchemy house can also promise this. In addition, Danshinzi smiled. The alchemy house can also promise to allocate a large amount of resources to help you support the Shuntian sect. I believe that with the alchemy house's support, the Shuntian sect will rise quickly. Before long, it will be one of the top forces of the Bloodridge continent. He had the confidence and qualifications to make such a promise. In comparison, even the overturning formation sky did not have the confidence to make such a promise. The overturning formation sky was very strong, but not as strong as the alchemy house. Their financial resources could not be compared to the alchemy house's. Although the crafting pavilion's financial resources were second only to the alchemy house's, their overall strength could not compare to the overturning formation sky. The only force in the world that could do this was the alchemy house. Lin Feng was shocked. These guys had investigated him thoroughly in such a short time. The three ancient forces lived up to their reputation. Yes, Lin Feng had originally planned to use this as an excuse to reject the three forces' recruitment. However, before he could say anything, Sui Wuxin and Danshinzi's words had nipped his plans in the bud and forced him to express his attitude. Moreover, in front of so many experts, the two had shown their sincerity. If Lin Feng still found an excuse to refuse, it would be tantamount to not knowing his place. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Even if one used their toes to think, they would know that the result would not be good. These guys. Lin Feng was a little annoyed. He did not like to be restrained. When he first joined the Shuntian sect, he was forced by the environment and had no choice. Secondly, the Shuntian sect had a high degree of freedom and very few restrictions. However, ancient forces like the overturning formation sky and the alchemy house would definitely have a perfect set of strict rules. There was probably no freedom to speak of. When the three ancient forces were mentioned, Lin Feng could not help but look at Gu Tianfang. From the beginning to the end, this senior had only said one sentence. Other than that self-introduction, there was nothing else. It was as if he was an invisible person. However, with Gu Tianfang's status, how could he be an invisible person? Among the three giants, Gu Tianfang was the only one that Lin Feng had a good impression of. Firstly, it was because Lin Feng had a good impression of craftsmen. Secondly, Gu Tianfang was the only one who did not force him. Since the Shuntian sect's excuse is useless, then Lin Feng sighed. It seemed that he had no choice but to use his ultimate weapon. He straightened his body and glanced at the three people in front of him with bright eyes. He said slowly, "The force this junior is talking about is not the Shuntian sect." Sui Wuxin, Danshinzi, and Gu Tianfang were immediately surprised. The surrounding people also looked at Lin Feng with great confusion. Even those who knew Lin Feng, such as Jing Ting, Huang Wenbing, Dong Zhua, and Shen Tong, were puzzled. He hasn't joined any other force besides the Shuntian sect, has he? They had always been by Lin Feng's side from the Shuntian sect to the Sword God's palace. They had never seen Lin Feng join any other force. Sui Wuxin frowned. "Little brother, are you deliberately making up an excuse because you don't want to join any of our forces?" His tone was a little dissatisfied and his eyes were a little unfriendly. Danshinzi, on the other hand, showed good self-restraint. He was as elegant and calm as before. He smiled and said, "Little brother, why don't you tell us which force you've joined? Is it more powerful than the alchemy house?" It sounded like a question of doubt, and it also sounded like a very sincere question. However, the content of the question seemed to have a hint of mockery in it. Lin Feng didn't care about the two's reaction. he said calmly. "I don't know if this force is more powerful than the alchemy house, but I think that even an existence like the alchemy house has to show some respect to its master." Whoosh! A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. The blue sky, the black mass of people, and the densely packed black dots were all in an uproar. No one believed Lin Feng's words. The alchemy house was the #1 force in the Sui-Yang realm. Countless doubtful eyes were cast at Lin Feng. If Lin Feng couldn't give a good explanation, he would probably be drowned in the endless disdain and criticism. Dan Chenzi's face twitched imperceptibly, but soon returned to normal. He said with a faint smile, "Little brother, why don't you tell us who this person is? Why should the alchemy house respect him? I wonder if the almighty Saint King has the right to do so?" Lin Feng took a deep breath and turned his wrist. His palm faced up, and a token made of metal similar to black iron lay quietly in his palm. The token, which was flowing with a silver luster, seemed to bloom with a dazzling light, attracting everyone's attention. The Saint King token. Many people blurted out when they saw the token. Even Dan Chenzi, Sui Wuxin, and Gu Tianfang couldn't help but change their expressions. The Saint King token, the Saint Emissary. There were very few Saint Kings in the world, but those who had the right to pass down the Saint King token could be counted on one hand. Not every Saint King had the right to pass down the Saint King token. Only the Saint Kings who ranked at the top of the Saint Kings had the right to pass down the Saint King token. A warlord without a Saint Ruler token was a pure warlord. A general with a Saint King token could be called a Saint King Emissary. A Saint King Emissary was the most respected person under a Saint King. They were second only to one person and above millions. Sometimes they even had some of the authority of a Saint King. There were very few Saint King emissaries in the world, and every one of them was the best general under a Saint King. Moreover, they were the best generals under the most powerful Saint Kings. This weight was so heavy that it could not be heavier. Lin Feng didn't know this. He thought that the Saint King token was just a token that represented his identity, so he didn't think too much and took it out to prove that he wasn't lying. How could he know the significance of the Saint King token? Chapter 591. Not many people knew about the Saint King token, and even fewer understood its significance. But even those who had never heard of the Saint King token could guess a thing or two just by looking at the expressions of the three magnates. As magnates at the top of the pyramid of the Sui-Yang realm, there were not many things that could make Dan Chenzi, Sui Wuxin, and Gu Tianfang's expressions change so drastically. The Saint King token was one of them. And those who understood the significance of the Saint King token could understand why the three magnates' expressions changed so drastically. On the surface, the three magnates were magnates at the top of the Sui-Yang realm and even the infinite planes. They were like emperors in the human world, and their status was so revered that almost no one could compare with them. But they knew that in the eyes of others, the three magnates were far from being as high as they were imagined. Some of them were on equal footing with the three magnates, and some were even above them. Even the three magnates had to be careful when facing these people, and did not dare to offend them. This group of people had a unified title, and that was warlords. Of course, the three magnates did not care about ordinary warlords, but there were a very small number of warlords that the three magnates could not afford to offend. No matter who it was, as long as they had the slightest connection with the Saint King, they were no longer ordinary. Even if it was just an ordinary warlord, the three magnates could not completely ignore them. But if it was a warlord with a Saint King token, the three magnates could not wait to avoid him, let alone offend him. The three magnates were not included in the list of people who were related to the Saint King. Otherwise, Dan Chenzi and the other two would not be qualified to be called the three magnates. However, it was precisely because every warlord was a subordinate of the Saint King that it was unfair to ordinary people to include them. So when people ranked their strength, status, influence, and so on, they usually excluded this group of people. Moreover, those powerful battle generals were all mysterious and unfathomable. Some were not even known by people, and the final ranking was not accurate. Thus, they were excluded. This way, everything was much clearer. It could only be said that the subordinates of the Saint King were too mysterious. They lived in two completely different circles from ordinary people, and had very little interaction with each other. And at this moment, when everyone saw the token that was circulating with a silver halo under the sunlight, everyone's body began to tremble. They looked up with reverence at the ordinary-looking figure. Even Emperor Bing, Spiritual Master Huyang, Emperor Mang, the Five Absolutes, and many other influential experts, these geniuses of the older generation, lowered their noble heads in front of this skinny young man. If there were people who were jealous of Lin Feng before, no one dared to be jealous now. They did not even dare to have such thoughts. Even the Supreme Saint King of King thinks so highly of him. No one dared to have the slightest bit of unfavorable thoughts against Lin Feng. This was a genius that the Saint King thought highly of. Even if they ate a leopard's gall, they would not dare to offend him, let alone hurt him. As the initiator of this matter, Lin Feng was also stunned by the effect of the Saint King token. After a long while, he came back to his senses, shook his head, and said calmly, "I am honored to be valued by all of you seniors, and I thank all of you for your kindness. However, as you have all seen, I am now a subordinate of the Saint King, and naturally cannot join any other forces. Therefore, please leave." With the Saint King as a shield, he did not think that Danchunzi and Sui Wuxin would dare to force or even threaten him. In the eyes of the Saint King, even the three magnates were no different from ants. At this moment, the three magnates came back to their senses. However, to Lin Feng's surprise, he did not see any disappointment on their faces. Instead, he saw great joy. Things were beginning to develop out of Lin Feng's control. "Little brother, there is something you do not know," Danchunzi said with a smile. The Saint King did not say that the Saint King's emissaries cannot join other forces. Therefore, even if you are the Saint King's emissary, you can choose to join the Pill House. Moreover, with your status, you will be valued and nurtured by the Pill House. Sui Wuxin continued, "Join the Overturn Formation Sky. I can guarantee that you will be provided with the most resources, and that you will grow in the shortest time possible. The Pill House may be ranked ahead of the Overturn Formation Sky for now, but I believe that with you joining us, it will only be a matter of time before the Overturn Formation Sky surpasses the Pill House. Moreover, the Pill House is already number 1. Even if you join us, you will only bring them to the next level. The world will not remember your contributions. However, the Overturn Formation Sky is different. The Overturn Formation Sky has the potential to surpass the Pill House. If you join us, the Overturn Formation Sky will surpass the Pill House and change the situation of the world. Just like Senior Hua Guang, the world will remember you forever." His eyes were passionate and full of sincerity. "Not necessarily," Danchunzi smiled faintly. "Brother Sui, I'm afraid you do not see the difference between the Overturn Formation Sky and the Pill House. The Pill House has stood tall for billions of years. The Overturn Formation Sky cannot compare to it. As the saying goes, even the cleverest housewife cannot cook without rice. With the Overturn Formation Sky as the foundation, no matter how talented you are, you will not be able to display your full potential. It will be even more impossible for you to surpass the Pill House. If that is the case, wouldn't your talents be wasted? However, if you join the Pill House, you will be able to display your talents to your heart's content on the stage that is the Pill House. In the end, you will achieve something that will shock the world." Both of them had a point. However, Dan Chenzi's point was better and more attractive. However, Lin Feng had no interest in joining any of the forces. He was still doubting what Dan Chenzi said at the beginning. Was it really possible to join other forces after joining the Saint King's side? He was a little suspicious. He was afraid that this old monster was fooling him. Indeed, although Dan Chenzi only looked like a middle-aged scholar, and at most gave people a feeling of boundless majesty, his age was definitely at the level of an old monster. He only looked young because he was a peerless genius. His age should not have exceeded half of his lifespan, which was why he looked like a middle-aged man. After a moment of hesitation, Lin Feng asked, "Senior, are you sure I can join other forces?" Dan Chenzi stopped smiling and nodded seriously. "You don't have to worry about that. How would I dare to joke around with the Supreme Saint King? He is not lying to you." Gu Tianfang, who had been silent all this time, also said seriously, "As long as the force you join is not another Saint King's side, you can choose as you wish." Lin Feng was thoughtful. "What if the Saint King's orders conflict with your goals?" "Of course, the Saint King's orders are the norm." Dan Chenzi, Sui Wuxin, and Gu Tianfang had no objections to this. After a rough understanding, Lin Feng glanced at the three giants and asked, "It's not impossible for me to join your forces, but there's a precondition." Since ancient times, there were only a few people who dared to raise conditions with the three magnates. Among those few people, Lin Feng was definitely the most qualified one. The three giants looked at each other. A hint of nervousness flashed through their eyes. Sui Wuxin asked impatiently, "What condition?" Lin Feng looked straight at the three of them and said frankly, "I am in urgent need of a soul stone. If seniors can find one for me, I will immediately join your forces without a second word." Soul stone. Dan Chenzi, Sui Wuxin, and Gu Tianfang all frowned. They had existed for longer than many forces. Although they had not deliberately studied soul stones, they still knew their uses and how rare they were. To any earth saint, a soul stone was a priceless treasure. Nothing could replace its use. It could be said that it was unique. However, they had never seen a soul stone in their long lives. They had only heard of it. Lin Feng's condition was truly difficult for them. They didn't know where to start. After a long while, Sui Wuxin shook his head and said, "I have heard of soul stones, but I have never seen one." Overturning Formation Sky doesn't have one either. In my opinion, the Pill Pavilion and Refining Pavilion can't produce one either. So, little brother, please change your condition. Soul stones were precious, but Lin Feng was more important to them. Therefore, if they really did have a soul stone, they wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. Unfortunately, they didn't have a soul stone. They could only watch as this opportunity slipped away. "Little brother, you want a soul stone to save someone, right?" Dan Chenzi said after some thought. "The Pill Pavilion doesn't have a soul stone, but we have the 9 Transformations Soul Return Pill, which is second only to soul stones. The 9 Transformations Soul Return Pill is a heaven-class high-tier pill. We only have 3 in the entire Pill Pavilion. Any one of them is priceless. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it is the Pill Pavilion's greatest treasure. The effect of the 9 Transformations Soul Return Pill is extremely heaven-defying. Even if a person's soul is severely damaged, as long as their soul origin is not damaged, they can be saved even if their soul energy is exhausted." As soon as these words came out, there was a sound of people sucking in cold air. Hiss, the famous 9 Transformations Soul Return Pill could be said to be known by everyone. It was a panacea for healing the soul. The value of such a panacea couldn't be measured by faith crystals. That was an insult to the 9 Transformations Soul Return Pill. Who would have thought that Dan Chenzi would be willing to promise the legendary 9 Transformations Soul Return Pill in order to attract Lin Feng? Even Sui Wuxin and Gu Tianfang couldn't help but look at Dan Chenzi in shock. This hypocrite had changed his usual style and promised such a panacea. It was too shocking that he had such a straightforward side to him. However, from Dan Chenzi's attitude, one could see how attractive Lin Feng was to them. Dan Chenzi, who had always been stingy, was willing to offer an astronomical price. It could only mean that he was too eager for Lin Feng to join him. This kind of desire had far exceeded the value of the 9 transformations soul return pill. It was to the point that he did not hesitate at all when he made the promise. Sui Wuxin clenched his fists. He wanted to stop what was about to happen, but there was nothing he could do. Even overturn formation sky didn't have a panacea like the 9 transformations soul return pill. As for Gu Tianfang, he felt a deep sense of powerlessness. He could only watch as Lin Feng was taken in by the pill pavilion. Chapter 592. Of the 3 ancient forces, the pavilion of craftsmanship needed such a genius more than the pavilion of alchemy and the overturned formation sky. But at the same time, the pavilion of craftsmanship was the least attractive to geniuses. The conditions they could offer were also the worst. The pavilion of craftsmanship was ranked 3rd, far less competitive than the pavilion of alchemy and the overturned formation sky. The only advantage the pavilion of craftsmanship had was their long history. Their long history was still attractive to some geniuses. Because of this, the pavilion of craftsmanship was barely able to stay in 3rd place and not be eliminated in the fierce competition. It was already not easy to stay in 3rd place. It was too difficult for the pavilion of craftsmanship to go any further. Now that the pavilion of craftsmanship was lacking talents, Gu Tianfang had no confidence that he could lead the pavilion of craftsmanship back to its former glory. Therefore, the pavilion of craftsmanship was in urgent need of someone who could hold the fort. They needed an amazing genius. Only with such a genius could the pavilion of craftsmanship have a chance of survival. He's the Sage King's emissary, Gu Tianfang screamed in his heart. With Lin Feng's status, as long as he was willing to join the pavilion of craftsmanship, even if he had no talent and did nothing, just the title of Sage King's emissary was enough to change the pavilion of craftsmanship's decline. But there was nothing Gu Tianfang could do. He could only watch such a genius join the pavilion of alchemy. How could he not know the charm of the 9 transformations soul return elixir? He was certain that no one in the world could refuse the 9 transformations soul return elixir. Even he, the pavilion of craftsmanship's leader, could not resist the charm of the 9 transformations soul return elixir, let alone a young man. At this moment, Gu Tianfang felt a strong sense of defeat. He even felt a trace of despair. He shook his head dejectedly. It's hopeless. The pavilion of craftsmanship has no hope at all. Compared to him, Sui Wuxin's reaction was not much better. The plans and expectations of the 2 of them were instantly destroyed by that small pill. They could only blame the pavilion of alchemy for being too rich and Dan Chenzi for being too generous. A 9 transformation saint weapon was already a rare treasure in the world, but the 9 transformations soul return elixir was 10 times more valuable than a 9 transformations saint weapon. What else could they say? At the same time, Dan Chenzi's face revealed a victorious smile. In the end, he was the one who had the last laugh in this competition. The pill pavilion was the final winner. Even though Lin Feng hadn't spoken yet, Dan Chenzi had already predicted the result. He didn't think anyone could resist the charm of the 9 transformations soul return pill. Although the price of a 9 transformations soul return pill is a bit high, but it was all worth it. Dan Chenzi smiled as he thought to himself. The promise of a 9 transformations soul return pill was something he had decided on long ago. It was his plan. He wanted to show the world the absolute strength of the pill pavilion. He wanted to tell everyone that the pill pavilion was truly number 1. He also wanted to use this kind of absolute power to make the overturned formation sky and the blacksmith pavilion retreat. However, he didn't expect things to be so coincidental. Lin Feng actually needed a soul stone. Although the 9 transformations soul return pill wasn't as miraculous as a soul stone, it wasn't far off. Moreover, the 9 transformations soul return pill was very effective in increasing one's soul strength. Not only could it recover a person's soul strength, it could also improve one's soul strength. This was a miraculous effect that a soul stone didn't have. In comparison, the value of a 9 transformations soul return pill wasn't any lower than a soul stone. However, soul stones were just too rare. Dan Chenzi looked at Lin Feng with a smile. He was waiting for Lin Feng's answer. As long as Lin Feng spoke, there would be no more suspense. Of course, in his heart, the matter was already over. There was no suspense at all. The 9 transformations soul return pill. Lin Feng looked at Dan Chenzi in shock. He didn't think that Dan Chenzi would be willing to use such a sacred medicine to win him over. He underestimated his attraction to these ancient factions, and also underestimated the influence of the Thunder Punishment token. If it weren't for Nono, perhaps he really would have accepted Dan Chenzi's invitation and joined the Pill Pavilion. However, the 9 transformations soul return pill's main purpose was to recover and strengthen soul power. For Nono, whose soul origin had been severely damaged, the 9 transformations soul return pill wasn't very useful. Lin Feng had learned this from the Thunder Punishment Holy King. The only thing among geniuses that could save Nono was soul stones. Nothing else would be of any use. Therefore, Lin Feng could only shake his head regretfully in the face of such a sacred medicine. Senior Dan Chenzi, thank you for your kindness, but this junior needs soul stones, and only soul stones. Lin Feng sighed. Dan Chenzi's smile froze. Sui Wuxin and Gu Tianfang looked at Lin Feng in disbelief. The surrounding experts were all shocked. He actually refused. How absurd and unbelievable! Although Lin Feng's refusal was very tactful, it was still a refusal. No matter how tactful it was, it couldn't change the result. Gosh, that's the 9 transformations soul return pill. Everyone's eyes widened. Even Spiritual Master Huyang and Soldier Emperor were very surprised. No one had expected Lin Feng to refuse the 9 transformations soul return pill, which was extremely valuable. Even if the 9 transformations soul return pill can't save the person he wants to save, he can take it himself and strengthen his soul power. The improvement of his soul power can not only increase his strength, but also increase the speed of comprehending laws. Even a mediocre person who takes the 9 transformations soul return pill will become a genius, not to mention that he himself is a genius. No one could understand Lin Feng's thoughts, not even the 3 magnates. After a long while, the crowd gradually quieted down. Dan Chenzi's face was a little gloomy, but he didn't dare to lose his temper because of Lin Feng's identity as the Holy King's emissary. He could only force a stiff smile and ask, "Little brother, are you really not going to think about it?" Lin Feng shook his head. "Only soul stones can save a relative of mine whose soul origin has been severely damaged. I hope you can understand." Dan Chenzi frowned deeply. This was the first time he had shown such an expression since he came to the Sword God's palace. Before this, no matter what happened, the smile on his face had never disappeared. It was as if he was looking at the changes in the world with a smile. However, before he could speak again, Lin Feng said to the crowd, "I think you all know that I urgently need soul stones to save someone. If any of you can take out a soul stone, I promise to join your force. This promise is valid forever." Of course, if Nono was already awake, then this promise was automatically invalid. Everyone knew this, so no one asked. To Lin Feng's disappointment, no one spoke for a long time. It seemed that they didn't have soul stones. If they really did have soul stones, then whether they directly gave them to Lin Feng in exchange for his joining or to one of the three ancient forces in exchange for the protection of the three ancient forces, it was worth it. Since they didn't speak, it proved that they really didn't have soul stones. However, after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange. After all, soul stones were too rare. In the history of the Suiyang realm, they had only appeared a few times. Lin Feng was already mentally prepared for this. Although he was a little disappointed, it wasn't unacceptable. "Little brother, let's change the condition," Dan Chenzi said. "I'm afraid no one here can take out a soul stone." Surprisingly, Sui Wuxin didn't refute Dan Chenzi. Instead, he nodded in agreement. Although the overturned formation sky isn't as rich as the Elixir Pavilion, it still has many treasures. However, I'm afraid you won't be able to find a soul stone in the entire Suiyang realm. Although he was exaggerating, it wasn't without reason. At this time, Gu Tianfang, who had been silent for a long time, spoke hesitantly. "We don't have soul stones in our crafting pavilion, but there is some information about soul stones in our archives." His words immediately attracted everyone's attention. At the same time, Lin Feng's eyes lit up. As expected of the most ancient force in the Suiyang realm. If it was an ordinary piece of information, Gu Tianfang naturally wouldn't choose to reveal it at this time. This was because almost all the ancient forces would have mentioned it. Since he chose to reveal it at this time, it meant that this information wasn't ordinary. It would definitely be of great help to Lin Feng. At least, it wouldn't be useless information. In fact, Gu Tianfang wasn't confident because the information about soul stones would be of limited help to Lin Feng. Trying to win Lin Feng over with this information was no different from a fool's dream. However, he still wanted to give it a try. 100 million years ago, an amazing genius appeared in the crafting pavilion. His talent might not be inferior to little brother's. Gu Tianfang's words were earth-shattering. Perhaps everyone will doubt my words, but I firmly believe that his talent is worthy of such an evaluation. His surname is Lin, and his name is Lin Miao. Although he came from a low-level plane called the Punishment Wind Realm, his talent in crafting was amazing. It only took him a few 100,000 years to become a heaven-grade craftsman, and he even crafted the world's only heaven-grade sacred armor. Pausing for a moment, he looked around. "You've only heard that there was someone who made a saint armor that surpassed the 6th Revolution saint armor. Most of you even doubted the authenticity of the news. Today, I can answer you with certainty. This matter is true, and that person is Lin Miao." At the mention of Lin Miao, Gu Tianfang's eyes couldn't help but become fanatical. Because of his appearance, the crafting pavilion rose rapidly, and there was a tendency to restore the glory of the ancient times. Gu Tianfang paused for a moment, and then his eyes dimmed. He said with some pain, "Unfortunately, Lin Miao's success was also Lin Miao's failure. He didn't stay in the crafting pavilion for long before he disappeared. Not long after he disappeared, a Saint King sent his subordinates to deal with the crafting pavilion. The reason was that Lin Miao had offended that Saint King. Any force related to Lin Miao suffered crazy revenge. That revenge caused the crafting pavilion to suffer a huge blow, and it was almost destroyed. If a Saint King didn't appear in time to turn the tide and stop the crazy attack of those generals, I'm afraid that the crafting pavilion would no longer exist today." These could be said to be the secrets of the crafting pavilion, and also the sad history of the crafting pavilion's gradual decline. Gu Tianfang said it in front of everyone, which was tantamount to exposing his own scars. This required great courage. It would be fine if he succeeded, but if he failed, the crafting pavilion situation would be even more difficult. As a force that had offended a Saint King, it required great courage to join. Who knew if the Saint King would give the crafting pavilion a heavy blow if he was unhappy? Gu Tianfang's actions were undoubtedly cutting off all means of retreat and fighting with his back to the river. He was betting the future of the crafting pavilion. However, the crafting pavilion should be proud to be able to survive until today under the revenge of the Saint King. Although everyone was shocked by the experience of the crafting pavilion, they still had doubts in their hearts. What does Lin Miao have to do with the Soul Stone? Gu Tianfang didn't mention the Soul Stone, but focused on Lin Miao, which was puzzling. However, no one noticed that after hearing Gu Tianfang's words, the young man, who had been calm from beginning to end, began to tremble slightly. His eyes, which were as calm as a demon, actually hid a crazed excitement. At the corner of his eyes, there was a faint glimmer of light that was sparkling and pure. Saint King, Xingfeng Realm, Heaven-grade sacred armor, Lin Miao, Lin Miao, Lin Miao, Miao, Lin Hai. It was just a few simple words and a name, but there was too much hidden information. When all this information gathered together, it formed a torrent that attacked the thin figure's heart. Chapter 593. Although their names were different, Lin Feng was very sure that Lin Miao was his ancestor, Lin Hai. Not to mention that both of them were from the Punishment Wind Realm. Just the fact that they could refine a saint armor that surpassed the 6th Revolution saint armor was something that no one else in the world could do except for Lin Hai. Moreover, the word Miao was composed of 3 water characters. Its meaning was undoubtedly very similar to the sea. This name was most likely the old ancestor's alias. Lin Feng did not know why his ancestor had changed his alias, but there were many suspicious points that proved that Lin Miao was Lin Hai. As I expected, the ancestor's disappearance is most likely related to the Holy King. Lin Feng clenched his fist. If Lin Hai was only an ancestor of the Lin family, Lin Feng would not care so much. However, Lin Hai was not only an ancestor of the Lin family, but also a traveler from Earth. This could be inferred from the many clues left by Lin Hai. Lin Hai was not only from Earth, but also from Earth's future world, a future world with highly advanced technology. No one could understand the feeling of meeting one's own compatriot in a foreign land. However, Lin Feng suppressed the wild excitement in his heart and listened quietly. He did not dare to show the slightest difference, otherwise, he would have to face the crazy revenge of the Holy King. As a descendant of the Lin family, he would have to bear the revenge of the ancestor's enemies. However, the ancestor was a supreme Holy King, and Lin Feng was only an expert of Earth Stage 6. Even with the Death God's will and rage, these 2 trump cards, he would not be able to pose the slightest threat to the Holy King. Even the weakest Holy King could kill Lin Feng with a flick of his finger. Therefore, he did not dare to make a sound or show the slightest difference. Otherwise, what awaited him would be a destructive blow. However, he had firmly remembered this in his heart. One day, he would use his own way to end this matter. Countless eyes were watching, but no one noticed Lin Feng's abnormality. Gu Tianfang continued to narrate. Perhaps some people will ask, I have been talking about Lin Miao for a long time. What does he have to do with the Soul Stone? That's right, according to the records of our crafting pavilion, Lin Miao has also searched for soul stones. And he really found it. His eyes were bright. Since ancient times, almost everyone who obtained a soul stone was a person with heaven-defying luck. They all had one thing in common, and that was that they all obtained the soul stone by accident. They didn't actively search for it. Lin Miao wasn't the only one looking for soul stones, but he was the only one who found one. Just from this point alone, we can see how powerful he is. Lin Feng's eyes lit up and he was overjoyed. Old Ancestor really found the soul stone. Since Lin Miao had found the soul stone as Lin Miao's descendant, he might not lose to Lin Miao. Unfortunately, as soon as Lin Miao found that soul stone, he gave it to one of his friends. Gu Tianfang sighed regretfully. That friend of his is very mysterious. Up until now, our weapon refining pavilion still doesn't know the identity of his friend, and no one has seen his friend. Moreover, after Lin Miao disappeared, his friend also disappeared without a trace, so we don't know how he found the soul stone. Dan Chenzi smiled faintly. Brother Gu, you've said so much, but it doesn't seem to be of much help in finding the soul stone. Although Lin Feng's attitude had made Dan Chenzi give up on recruiting him, he wouldn't let Lin Feng join the crafting pavilion without doing anything. Dan Chenzi was very happy to take advantage of this opportunity to attack his opponent. Sui Wuxin obviously had the same idea. He was even more direct than Dan Chenzi. I was wondering what it was, he mocked. After so long, it's all nonsense. However, he secretly rejoiced in his heart. That unknown Lin Miao really lived up to his reputation as a genius. If not for the bad luck of the weapon refining pavilion, which coincidentally encountered that kind of incident, the status of the weapon refining pavilion and the overturning formation sky would have been swapped. Because of this, he was even more determined to stop Lin Feng from joining the crafting pavilion. We can't let Lin Feng join the crafting pavilion. Both Sui Wuxin and Dan Chenzi became serious. The alchemy pavilion didn't want its position to be threatened, and the overturning formation sky didn't want to have another competitor. Gu Tianfang glanced at the two and surprisingly didn't refute. Instead, he said to himself, although no one knows how Lin Miao found the soul stone, there is a map in the crafting pavilion's records. This map was left behind by Lin Miao. It is said that following this map will lead to the soul stone. His tone was very calm. Perhaps it was because there was nothing sadder than a dead heart. He slowly calmed down from his initial impulse. He gradually realized that the map couldn't change the final result. He wasn't lying. The crafting pavilion did have such a map, and Lin Miao did say so. However, the problem was precisely this map. You're lying. Sui Wuxin immediately refuted fiercely. If there really was a map, the crafting pavilion would have sent people to find the soul stone long ago. Why is there no soul stone until now? Dan Chenzi's eyes were also sharp. You just said that you don't know how Lin Miao found the soul stone. Now you say that he left a map. Isn't that contradictory? Everyone was also very confused. Although Sui Wuxin and Dan Chenzi's reactions were a little exaggerated, what they said was the truth. Gu Tianfang looked very calm. Why would he say something so contradictory? Lin Feng, on the other hand, was quite calm. He believed that Gu Tianfang must have his own reasons for saying this. With Gu Tianfang's status, he wouldn't say such things in front of so many people. Therefore, he chose to believe Gu Tianfang. He quietly waited for Gu Tianfang to explain. As Lin Feng expected, Gu Tianfang's expression didn't change in the face of countless doubts. He said calmly, "We don't know how Lin Miao found the soul stone. This is the truth. Lin Miao left a map. This is also the truth. It seems contradictory, but it's not. Because..." Everyone pricked up their ears. Looking around at everyone, Gu Tianfang said slowly, "Because the standard characters and symbols on the map are very strange. No one can understand them. Although we know that we can find the soul stone by following the route on the map, we don't even know where the map is. How are we supposed to find it?" For a moment, everyone was stunned. No one expected Gu Tianfang to give such an explanation. However, no one could refute it. "We thought that it was the characters and symbols of Lin Miao's hometown, the Xingfeng Plain. However, after our investigation, we found that the characters and symbols of the Xingfeng Plain were the same as the Suiyang realm. After that, we collected the characters of many other planes and compared them one by one. However, we found that none of them matched." Gu Tianfang smiled bitterly. "That's right. Even now, the artifact forging pavilion still hasn't found the soul stone. The map was also left behind, waiting for people to decipher it." The corner of Dan Chenzi's mouth raised. "It seems that the existence of the map is useless. Because even if you make it public, no one can understand it. Who knows if the map you're talking about really exists?" Sui Wuxin sneered. The way I see it, it's just a map you found someone to draw and then deliberately made up some characters and symbols to deceive the world. No one can understand it anyway. Whatever you say makes sense, don't you think? It wasn't impossible. Although Sui Wuxin was hostile to Gu Tianfang and the artifact forging pavilion, every word he said made sense, and no one could refute it. He turned to Lin Feng. Little brother, you'd better think it over. Gu Tianfang might be lying, and the map is completely made up. Even if he's not lying, and the map does exist, no one can understand it. Your wish to find the soul stone through it will be in vain. Don't make false accusations, Sui Wuxin. Gu Tianfang was so angry that he was shaking all over. He hurriedly looked at Lin Feng. Little brother, don't believe him. I, Gu Tianfang, swear to the Holy King that I'm not lying to anyone. So what? Sui Wuxin mocked. Even if the map is real, what's the point? This question stumped Gu Tianfang instead. Yes, even if the map is real, what's the point? The artifact forging pavilion spent so much effort and sent out so many people, but they still didn't find anything. Could Lin Feng see anything by himself? His eyes dimmed, and he opened his mouth, but all the words were stuck in his throat, and he could not say anything. Sigh. Gu Tianfang's stomach full of words turned into a heavy sigh. He bitterly smiled and said, Little brother, just pretend I didn't say anything. That map. He shook his head. Perhaps it was just Lin Miao's prank. His last glimmer of hope had now turned into despair. He couldn't help but mock himself. What right do I have to ask for more, given the artifact forging pavilion's current situation? The glimmer of hope he had just now was just him deceiving himself and making his final struggle. A warm smile appeared on Dan Chenzi's face. Little brother, you're a smart man. I'm sure you know what's the best choice. Compared to Gu Tianfang's so-called illusory map, the overturning formation sky can promise that once you join us, we'll mobilize a large number of people to search for soul stones for you, Sui Wuxin said seriously. After a moment of silence, Gu Tianfang sighed and shook his head. He turned around and walked forward slowly, his hand on the hilt of his sword. His actions showed that he'd given up. But everyone could understand his reaction. After struggling for so long, it was all for nothing. He still couldn't stop the artifact forging pavilion's decline. How sad was that? Looking at the back of the one-armed figure, everyone felt an inexplicable sadness that couldn't be dispersed. Under the setting sun, the lonely figure looked even more sorrowful and stifling. Wait. A hearty laugh rang out, causing the figure to tremble and stop in his tracks. When Gu Tianfang slowly turned around and looked at Lin Feng in confusion, he saw Lin Feng open his mouth, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. He smiled and said, Pavilion Master, are you planning to leave alone without us? That smile was clean, clear, and somewhat sincere. Dan Chenzi and Sui Wuxin were stunned. All the experts were petrified. Gu Tianfang stared blankly at the figure of the young man with a brilliant smile. His eyes suddenly widened, and he was surrounded by a thick sense of happiness. 2 sparkling and translucent drops of water suddenly fell from the corners of his eyes. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.